Hey, you're watching my official compilation channel, but if you want to see my newest videos as soon as they're uploaded, check out my main channel, Chat History. Alright, enjoy the video. History's Deadliest Snipers. Oh, my mug. If there was ever a true patriot that answered his country's call of duty, it would have to be this 5'3" snow cone of glee. This is Simo Hauha. But don't let that smile fool you. It was the last thing hundreds of Soviet soldiers would see before being no-scoped out of life's lobby. If they ever even caught a glimpse of him, that is. Born as a Finnish farmer baby on a farm in Finland in 1905, Simo's childhood consisted mainly of helping out the daily farm chores like tilling soil, harvesting crops, petting a cow or two, and most notably, hunting game. A skill which he started to develop a real knack for. At age 17, Simo volunteered to join Finland's Civil Guard. During his volunteer work, the rather reclusive Simo stood out amongst his peers with his innate ability to handle a rifle. There's never a more iconic duo than reclusive children and firearms. Simo repeatedly outgunned his colleagues in tons of competitions, performing feats that would make you go, he's pretty good. One such feat was sniping a small target 6 times in a minute, 150 meters away, with a bolt-action rifle. For my American audience, it's like sniping a Happy Meal 6 times across 1.5 football fields in under a minute with no fancy scopes. This shit made the Finns go absolutely bonkers, but this would pale in comparison to what Simo would accomplish down the road. Fast forward to 1939. The Russian Empire, now identifying as the Soviet Union, decides to bomb themselves right on the Finnish-Soviet border. Why, you ask? To start a war, of course. The Winter War. The Soviets wanted some of that Finland, so with a few Reds dead, it was time for redemption. The Soviet Union framed Finland for the bombing, which, my dearest viewer, is called a false flag operation. Want to start a war but don't feel like being viewed as the instigator? Simply attack your own people and convince everyone that it was someone else. Problem solved. But the ill-prepared Soviets would soon regret their actions. See, Soviet Supreme Leader fella Joseph Stalin was a bit of a paranoid Peter. He had Control-Alt-Deleted almost all of his smartest and most competent military strategists and leaders during the Great Purge, just to make sure that they wouldn't try to figuratively, or literally, backstab him. The result? A completely incompetent Red Army showing up in the snowy white Finnish fields wearing dark brown uniforms. This meant that the enemy were easy pickings for old Slick Simo. So, clad in his iconic white camouflage and equipped with his trusty M28-30 Mosin Nagant and Suomi KP-31 submachine gun, Simo Hauha would spend the next 98 days racking up 542 confirmed kills, earning the moniker the White Death. A name that evoked inspiration for the Finnish and terror for the Soviets. Quick side note, confirmed kills require another person to confirm them. Basically they're saying, yep, they killed that guy, I saw it happen. It's just a way to prevent egotistical snipers from claiming that they killed thousands when they were in fact just sitting there with their dicks in their hands. Anyway, Simo absolutely terrorized the Soviet forces. Having set up multiple vantage points in front of and behind enemy lines, he avoided major detection for months. Simo would enter a nest at dawn, packing down the snow and pouring water over it, giving it the proper nutrients to grow into big, strong ice. This not only stabilized his rifle, but prevented any kick-up when popping shots, which is usually a dead giveaway for a sniper's position. He even munched on snow to mask his own breath trails. When taking aim, Simo relied solely on his iron sights, not as a flex, but for tactical reasons. For one, he wasn't well trained in using scopes, so he stuck with what he knew best. He also knew that using a scope required you to raise your head ever so slightly to look into the scope properly. Those extra inches of dome exposure could mean life or death. Not to mention the fact that scopes fog up in the winter and also like to reflect sunlight, creating a glint off of the glass like a giant neon billboard saying, "Look over here, I'm a fucking sniper." It wasn't until March 6, 1940 that Simo would feel the searing hot pain of his own mortality hit him right in the face. Oh wait, that was an explosive bullet fired from a Soviet rifle. Those things were banned from warfare in 1868, by the Russians no less. The bullet had ripped through Simo's face and destroyed his left jaw, rendering him unconscious and, for a little while, presumed dead. He was later rescued and hospitalized, undergoing several reconstructive surgeries, eventually regaining consciousness on March 13th, the day that the Winter War ended. Unfortunately, Simo's farmland was lost to the Soviets after the war, but the Finnish government was all, "Nah, we got you, bro," and granted him new land to start over. And just as he was before the war, Simo happily resumed his life as a humble and reclusive farmer. He passed away peacefully at the age of 96 in 2002, 11 years after witnessing the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now on the other side, the Soviet Union had their own fair share of deadly snipers. And by that, I mean most of the deadliest snipers in history hailed from the great communist regime. So either their sniper training programs were top-notch, or they had solid propaganda skills. Or both. I have to say, it seems like the harder it is to pronounce the name, the better of a sniper they were. But for the Soviet Union, we will focus on one Lyudmila Pavlichenko, also known as Lady Death. Born in the Russian Empire in 1916, Lyudmila began developing her sharpshooter skills as a wee lass while competing in various youth marksman contests. Unfortunately, shooting guns doesn't pay the bills. But building them does. While working at a local armaments factory, she felt she was a little bit underappreciated and underpaid, so she enrolled herself in university to become a historian. In her spare time though, she continued to develop her marksman skills by attending sniping school, courtesy of the Red Army. That's a good thing too, cause it's June 1941 and there's someone at the door. It's the Germans. They're invading. Now with all these krauts going sour, Lyudmila formally volunteered for service. Because of her sniping classes, she was assigned to the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division as one of 2,000 female snipers. Lyudmila was now ready to live up to her full potential as a respected Red Army soldier. Yeah, she ended up digging a lot of trenches. And thanks to several weapon shortages, Lyudmila wasn't even equipped with a gun. She was only given a single grenade as a weapon. It wasn't until one of her slightly injured comrades gave her his M1891 30 Mosin Nagant that she was even capable of doing any damage. Her first instance of drawing blood was picking off 2 Nazi officers over 1,300 feet away.
Hans, you've got to try this strudel. It's to die for. Oh my god, Franz, you are always so literal.
And she was just getting started. Over the next several months, she fought through the Siege of Odessa, found love, immediately lost it to a mortar shell, fought in the Siege of Sevastopol, trained other snipers, and received numerous promotions, racking up a final confirmed kill count of 309 soldiers, including 36 Axis snipers, although it is believed that her true kill count could be much higher. In 1942, Lyudmila took a page out of her late husband's book and was hit in the face by mortar shrapnel. She was quickly evacuated from battle and treated for her injuries, spending about a month in the hospital. Instead of returning to the front lines, however, she served as a propagandist for the Soviet Union, granting her the title of Lady Death. She toured the United States and Canada, telling stories of her combat experiences in hopes of inspiring the Allies to launch more aggressive campaigns against the Axis powers. But Japan already gave a wealth of inspiration to the United States in 1941. Lyudmila was actually the first Soviet citizen to be received by a US president. What sucks though is that her time in the US wasn't all that great thanks to the US media. Instead of asking important questions about her service and her experiences as a wartime soldier, the American media instead focused on dumbass unimportant questions about her appearance and her style of dress. Hey toots, killing hundreds of fascists is cool, but what's with the ugly skirt? Even after her propaganda trips, Lyudmila never returned to battle. She continued to serve as a sniping instructor for the Red Army until the end of World War II, after which she went back to university and fulfilled her dream of becoming a historian. She then died of a stroke in 1974 at the age of 58, and to this day, she is considered to be the deadliest female sniper in all of history. Let's take a skip across the pond to the Great White North where we find our next marksman. This is Francis Pegamagabo, or as his future syllable-sensitive colleagues would call him, Peggy. Born with a tragic backstory of family loss, poverty, and disease, Pegamagabo was destined for a great hero arc. Raised according to the cultural customs and traditions of the Ojibwe Native American tribe, Pegamagabo was taught to hunt, fish, and be one with nature, growing into a healthy and disciplined young man, something that Canada would soon be in dire need of thanks to the efforts of a Serbian, a gun, and one dead Austro-Hungarian Archduke thousands of miles away. Great Britain had entered the fray of World War I in August of 1914, lumping Canada into the mix by default because, British territory. Since it is a war and all, Canada needs troops to lob onto the front lines. Well, guess who's at the front door to volunteer? That's right, Francis Pegamagabo. Now, the Canadian government at the time preferred their soldiers to be a little whiter, but he'll do. And so, at just 23 years old, Pegamagabo was a full-fledged maple syrup soldier. His first assignment was getting hucked over to Europe for basic training in England. Thanks to a pretty solid hunting level, he netted himself a job as both a scout and a sniper. His first taste of battle would be one of the most infamous of the Great War, the Second Battle of Ypres in April of 1915. This is about the time that the Germans started deploying chlorine gas as a way to flush out Allied soldiers. This was a dense, heavy gas that crept over the landscape and completely suffocated any soldier caught in its death cloud. Super effective in trench warfare, which is what World War I was all about. Equipped with his standard issue Canadian Ross rifle, a powerhouse in both range and accuracy but lacking in reliability, Pegamagabo fought his way across the Western Front. After the Second Battle of Ypres, where he actually gained fame for his ability to successfully carry messages across the battlefield with zero regard for his own safety, Peggy found himself in the Battle of the Somme, one of the deadliest battles of the Great War. Despite getting capped in his leg, Peggy had continued success in delivering critical information across the Allied front. Bro was like an instant messenger. But his next moves, however, would cement Pegamagabo in the history books for his selflessness and bravery. You see, he would often leave the safety of his battalion's trench into what is known as no man's land, the uninhabitable area between trenches just brimming with desolation and despair. Getting caught there meant certain death, as you'd be found in the crosshairs of an enemy rifle within seconds. That is, unless your name is Francis Pegamagabo. This dude would just weave in and out of gunfire, loot the dead for some spare ammunition, and bring it back to his fellow soldiers so that they could continue fighting. Legend has it that he actually injured his back from the sheer weight of the ammunition and the absolute brass balls that he carried around. Not only would he brave no man's land for restocking missions, but for recon as well. He would be able to scope out enemy weapons posts, vantage points, and defensive structures. Now, unfortunately, there's not too many juicy stories explicitly about his sniping abilities, but throughout the various battles he fought through, Francis Pegamagabo had accumulated 378 confirmed kills with an unreliable rifle, as well as being credited with capturing over 300 German soldiers. By the time the war was over, he achieved the rank of corporal and was awarded various medals for his service. He returned home as the most decorated indigenous soldier of the war and is renowned as the single most effective sniper of the Great War. One might say that the Germans took a pretty good pegging. But his service was not without consequence. Over the years, the old pegster racked up a fair amount of physical and psychological damage. Although a war hero overseas, he had returned to Canada to live in poverty and neglect as a native in the very country he fought for. And over the years, he would become an outspoken activist for native rights until his death in 1952 at the age of 61. In 2016, a bronze statue was commissioned and placed in his hometown of Parry Sound, forever immortalizing his noble military service. Just a stone's throw to the south, you have the absolute beacon of freedom that is the United States of America. I should know. I live there. And so did our last sniper, U.S. Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock. Ever since tasting his first crayon, Hathcock knew he wanted to be a Marine. It also helped that his papa was a World War II veteran, bringing home spoils of war for his kid to play soldier with. In 1959, Hathcock had celebrated his 17th birthday, blew out his candles, and immediately enlisted in the Marine Corps. That's my boy! During basic training, Hathcock impressed many of his fellow soldiers on the shooting range. He had qualified as an expert-level marksman, setting records left and right, one being a 248 out of a possible 250 on a mastery range, a record that remained until the course was formally retired, so that very much still stands in my opinion. His continued sharpshooter skills earned him recognition as a Marine Corps Distinguished Marksman in 1965. But just a year later in 1966, Hathcock's skills would be put to the test as he began deployment in the Vietnam War. Throughout his 2 tours of Vietnam, he racked up an impressive 93 confirmed kills with his Winchester Model 70 rifle. Doesn't sound that impressive. You say from behind your computer or phone. But let me tell you why you're wrong. During the Vietnam War, in order for a kill to be considered confirmed and count towards any official kill count, each kill must have been verified by the sniper spotter as well as a third party, usually an officer. But since you can't just have two people sitting around all day waiting to confirm kills, most wouldn't be considered confirmed. So while Hathcock tallied 93 confirmed kills on paper, his real count is believed to be much greater, more than 300. Now, this sort of efficacy as a sniper gained him quite the reputation amongst the enemy. During his tours, Hathcock would find himself pitted against enemy snipers wishing to claim the bounty on the elusive white feather, a name befitting of the man who carried a white feather in his hat. Hey, it's better than Captain Sweaty Nips. What? It's hot out here. But Hathcock didn't just snipe with his Winchester rifle. For a while, he actually held the record for the longest documented kill at 2,500 yards, or just under a mile and a half, with a scoped 50 caliber Browning machine gun. Hathcock's other claim to fame is when he took out an enemy sniper merely by noticing the glint of light from the enemy's scope. Remember when I told you that Simo Hauha hated scopes? Tools can really be your downfall. After noticing the glimmer of light on the horizon, Hathcock took a shot at the enemy and hit his mark. What he would soon realize, though, was that he made an insanely lucky shot. When going to confirm the kill, the sniper was found to have been shot through the scope of his rifle and through his eye. A shot that Hollywood loves recreating in war movies. Cut! Remember Saving Private Ryan? Well, you better, because I'm not showing any clips. God, I love that movie. Tom Hanks, Matt Damon, Paul Giamatti for like 5 seconds. Instant classic. Anyway, Hathcock's career as a sniper would soon go out with a bang. While riding in an armored transport vehicle, his platoon actually ran over an anti-tank mine. Hathcock managed to escape, pulling 7 fellow Marines out of the fire with him. Thanks to that good old pump and adrenaline, Hathcock had no idea that he was suffering severe burns and was finally pulled away by someone else. He ultimately suffered burns to his face, arms, and legs. Day in and day out, he was in constant pain. But that didn't stop him from helping establish the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School. There, he dedicated nearly all of his time teaching new and upcoming snipers. Over the years, Hathcock's health declined and he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, the disease that would ultimately take his life in 1999 at the age of 56. Richest pirates in history. Yarr. Blackbeard, probably the most notorious pirate in history, surprisingly ranks poorest among the wealthy pirates on this list, though he still made bank. Before the beard, he was known as Edward Teach, a small English chap born around the 1600s. History's forgotten the exact year, so we'll just go with it. In the same sense, not much is known about Little Eddie before he got his first facial pube, so let's fast forward a bit. In the early 1700s, the Caribbean was really going through it as the English, the French, and the Spanish duked it out for territorial control and dominance over trade routes in and around the Americas. One side effect of this conflict was the hiring of privately owned ships to attack and capture other ships. It was like a big game of rock, paper, scissors, but it was just guns, guns, guns. These private guns for hire were called privateers and were given written permission from their respective crowns to plunder and pillage any and all enemy ships to their liking. After all was said and done and the three crowns made peace in 1712, these privateers, who were used to being able to just ransack whoever they wanted to for all they were worth, were now out of a job. Oh. Well, legally speaking anyway. In fact, most privateers just kept up their shooting shiny ship shenanigans without a shadow of shame. And this is where the golden age of piracy began to peak and where most of these salty dogs made their fortunes. Eddie Teach was one such a privateer, having served under the English crown during Queen Anne's War in his youth. Around 1716, Eddie Spaghetti took an opportunity to make his fortune, joining a crew under renowned English pirate Benjamin Hornigold. After Teach had seized several small enemy ships and proved his worth, Hornigold was all, nice. And Teach was given more command. Eventually, Hornigold was ousted as captain after his refusal to attack fellow English ships that were just brimming and throbbing with gold. He was given a full pardon from the English crown and retired in peace. Teach was elected as the new captain and was thrilled at the new venture, as he could now do things his own way. Almost immediately after his promotion, the crew had captured the ironically named French ship La Concorde, meaning harmony in English. Now sure, one can expect a few casualties when a ship is absolutely reamed from both sides with cannon fire, but this was a slave ship, and this is how slave ships were packed. Surrendering immediately, the ship was taken and any surviving slaves were set free on a nearby island, to be recaptured later.
Okay.
The brand spanking new vessel was given a makeover, having 40 cannons slapped right on that thing. The ship was repurposed as Teach's flagship and renamed to the Queen Anne's Revenge. Now an absolute powerhouse, Teach took to the seas to seek his fortune. His most prominent tactic, of course, was intimidation. Not only did he have a brand new ship well equipped to rip any opposing vessel 40 new assholes, but his menacing appearance alone would surely make you pucker your own in fear. As his nickname implies, Blackbeard had a long, jet black beard entwined with various lit fuses. This gave him a terrifying demonic look, which was quickly offset by the smell of burning hair. But if you were sailing your sloop and saw this coming up in your rearview mirror, you just about shit a brick. For a couple years, Blackbeard terrorized the Carolinas, seizing ships and taking hostages. But across the Atlantic, English King Gentleman Dude George I was kind of getting sick of pirates. He offered free pardons to anyone willing to throw in the smelly towel and a free rope necklace to anyone that didn't. Blackbeard took the offer, but fell right back into piracy when the opportunity presented itself, which was immediately. Well, the governor of Virginia took matters into his own hands and assembled a team of pirate hunters to cut down the callous captain. In the wee hours of the morning on November 22nd, 1718, Blackbeard was ambushed by the Royal Navy, and his crew was slaughtered. Blackbeard himself sustained 20 stab wounds and 5 gunshot wounds. Although short-lived, Blackbeard's notorious pirate career amassed a pretty penny. It's estimated that his plundering racked up about $240,000, or about $18.5 million, adjusted for inflation in 2025. In the end, Blackbeard's head was severed and his body disrespectfully dunked in the drink. His melon was mounted as a warning to any and all future pirates, but an invitation to some. Born in the American colony of Massachusetts, Captain John Halsey began his sailing career as a privateer for the English crown in 1704. He started off by preying on French fishing fleets in the North Atlantic, but eventually preferred attacking Spanish ships near the Canary Islands off the coast of West Africa. This didn't last long, as his letter of marque, the English monarchy's permission slip to raid enemy ships, expired the very next year. Unable to legally loot and plunder, Captain Halsey turned to piracy and sailed further east into the Indian Ocean. The goal here was to intercept Mughal Empire treasure ships, but after several months of sailing around with no booty to show for it, crew morale was at an all-time low. This led to the aggravated crew jumping at any opportunity to score some simoleons. One day, a Dutch ship passed by Halsey and his crew, looking very vulnerable. Halsey, unwilling to attack and anger any European powers, shrugged it off and just kept chugging along. This elevated crew status from peeved to pissed, and Halsey was voted out of office. Which is something the pirates did. If they felt like the guy in charge just wasn't up to snuff, they could just vote him out democratically. Or metallically, depending on the crew. Halsey was metaphorically stripped of his captain duties, and the crew took it upon themselves to attack the Dutch ship, expecting it to be some pushover merchant equipped with nothing more than a single-shot pistol and a few why I oughtas. Turns out, not so. The Dutch ship, in fact, had several large cannons and a surplus of why I oughtas. The Dutch fired a warning shot at the approaching crew, and it was well received. The rogue cannonball managed to slightly injure the guy at the helm and took out a few armaments at the same time. The crew got the message and did a 540 out of there, immediately reinstating Halsey as captain with a collective, "my bad," which it kind of was. On the next trip to shore, Captain Halsey disbanded the crew and formed a new, less mutinous one. Still seeking his fortune, John Halsey found himself in the Red Sea in 1707, where he encountered not one, not two, but 5 heavily armed English warships. "What's the move, Captain?" "We move forward." "Sir, we're heavily outgunned and outmanned, don't you think?" Did I stutter? "Well, yeah, you kinda did." "I said, forward!" "Okay, damn, I spit in my face." Halsey and his crew stared down 5 massive warships, each one more English than the last. Seeing such a paltry crew, the English warships said frigate and inexplicably retreated. In the confusion, Halsey and his crew managed to capture 2 of the 5 warships before the rest completely buggered off. The crew returned to shore in 1708 to celebrate their well-deserved victory, but Halsey would never return to the sea. The 2 warships, along with their cash and cargo and various other small loot from Halsey's pirating career, are valued at around $19.4 million in today's money. It's just too bad that shortly after making port, all 3 of John Halsey's ships were ripped apart by a hurricane and sank. He lost his fortune, but at least he still had his health. Just kidding. He died of a fever shortly after the storm at the age of 45-ish. Sure, you can face 5 galleons strapped to the keel head on, but God forbid your body temperature goes up a few degrees. Yep, that Captain Morgan. The one responsible for many a college headache and morning walks of shame. But before he got a leg up on the rum business, he was quite the headache to the Spanish in the mid-1600s. Born Henry Morgan around 1635 in Wales, fate would bring this young fella to the Caribbean of all places. It's unknown exactly how he got there. He could have been part of an expedition, served as an apprentice, who knows. All we care about is that it's the 1660s and Morgan is now in the Caribbean, setting up his home base in Jamaica, which was recently captured by the English. Around this time, Jamaica was developing into a reputable trading hub, revving up its plantation business and seeing roughly 1,500 privateers spend their spoils on the local economy. Morgan sailed under English privateer Sir Christopher Mings as a captain, and together, the crew ransacked Spanish settlements in cities across the Caribbean and Central America. Jamaica did eventually come under threat of invasion from the smelly Spanish, so Captain Morgan was promoted to the much less marketable Admiral Morgan and was put in command of 12 ships and about 700 men. Through his letters of marque from the English crown, Morgan had permission to attack Spanish and Dutch vessels at sea. The problem, though, is that ships hold significantly less goods for the stealing than, say, an entire town. Though he was not legally cleared to do so, Morgan began attacking Spanish strongholds between the years of 1667 and 1671. His exploits netted him millions in Spanish bribes to spare towns and cities, and by the time he attacked Panama City in 1671, Morgan had over 30 ships at his command and hundreds of crew members, by far the largest across the Spanish Main at the time. Now, in order to take down this Panama City where the gold coins gleam and the girls got titties, Morgan sent a well-armed and well-trained party of 300 men, which clashed against roughly 1,600 inexperienced Spanish soldiers. And to say that the Spanish got their shit slapped would be an understatement. The Spanish forces saw between 400 to 500 casualties, with Morgan only losing 15 men. Panama's governor, now cornered, decided that instead of allowing Morgan to take the city, he would instead burn it to the ground. After Morgan claimed his victory, the city erupted in flame as the surviving Spanish troops set fire to the city. The blaze lasted until the next day, where Morgan and his crew plundered whatever goods weren't burnt to a complete crisp. They burnt the spices. They burned the gold. They burned me. Since what he did was technically illegal, Morgan was arrested but was never charged with any crime, and was instead formally knighted for his undying loyalty to the English crown. He did make his way back to Jamaica and served in a government role with the goal of eradicating piracy from the Caribbean waters, but he eventually fell out of power and fell onto the bottle, becoming a depressed alcoholic. In his final years, Morgan made sizable investments in plantations, owning 3 along with 131 slaves to work them. On August 25th, 1688, Henry Morgan died of complications from his heavy drinking at the age of 52. Across his very successful pirating career, Morgan's total captured booty is estimated to be worth around $19.6 million, adjusted for inflation. Although he died a drunk, his spirit lives on in your local alcohol store as an ironic proof of his spicy exploits. Remember to pour one out for the captain, who was really an admiral. Jean Fleury's story is one of luck rather than tactic. This time, we're gonna jump back to the 1520s, right about the time that Hernán Cortés had finished steamrolling the Aztec Empire. With seemingly endless spoils for the Spanish crown, Cortés sent 3 loaded treasure galleons back to Spain, and they almost made it back home. Almost. Enter Jean Fleury, a French privateer on the lookout for any Spanish ships who need a sinking. Stationed in Portugal during the 4 Years' War, which pitted France against the Holy Roman Empire, as well as Spain, Jean Fleury was in the perfect position to intercept Spanish and trade resupply ships. In early 1522, the 3 Spanish treasure galleons with gold blowing out their poop decks were spotted on the horizon, on the home stretch to Spain. Jean saw the small Spanish fleet and said, "No way, Jose," but in French. Fleury unleashed a flurry of cannons and quickly overtook 2 of the 3 ships before they could reach safer waters. Content with capturing the ships, Jean had no idea what he had stumbled upon. Below deck, the ship's holds were crammed and jammed with mountains of stereotypical pirate treasure, stacks of glistening gold, glittering jewels, exotic animals, and various rarities for the taking. Jean Fleury hit the jackpot, and with the score of a lifetime, he could have retired as a wealthy man. But that's for quitters, and real men know that the grind never stops. With knowledge of Spain's incredibly stacked ships, Fleury set out with his own fleet to try his luck at chasing that high. He and his crew managed to capture over 30 Spanish ships within the year, but couldn't find a fortune like the one before. The Spanish just about had enough of the Frenchmen and eventually captured, tried, and hanged the greedy little bastard in 1527. Fleury's amassed wealth was heavily carried by his first score, but nonetheless, his pirating career netted him about $47.1 million. But as Fleury found out, you can't take it with you. Big Black Bart was one of, if not the most successful pirate during the golden age of piracy in terms of vessels captured. The first detailed records of Black Bart, aka Bartholomew Roberts, dates back to 1719 when he was the second mate on a slave ship stationed off the Gold Coast of West Africa. It was here that the ship was captured by Welsh captain Howell Davis. Roberts and surviving members of the crew were forced to join Davis's ranks. But Davis found some value in Roberts, not only because he was a skilled navigator, but also a fellow Welshman. When you come across someone who speaks your native tongue, you're gonna bro it out, which is what happened.
Hello. Hello.
Davis and Roberts would have long conversations in their funny little language that none of the other sailors could understand. Through these little chit-chats, Davis convinced Roberts that, yo ho ho, a pirate's life was for him. Roberts was hesitant at first, but the idea grew on him when he realized that a life of piracy could, at best, lead to riches, and at worst, provide a short but adventurous life. Much better than being a wage slave to the man. Take that, capitalists. Instead, Roberts pulled himself up by his bootstraps and found a way to steal livelihoods away from hard-working folks. As such an inspirational captain, Roberts really looked up to Davis. But then Davis done got shot by the Portuguese. Roberts, recognized as a close companion to the now dead Davis, was elected as the new captain, much to the dismay of the Portuguese, who very quickly learned a demonstrative definition of the word revenge. Roberts, now in command, really fell into the role of a pirate captain. He began capturing ships left and right, and on an expedition to Brazil, encountered a large fleet of 42 Portuguese ships. Roberts was able to locate the richest ship in the fleet by using the simple tactic of asking nicely. And which one has the most gold on it? Oh, well, it's that one right over yonder. Oh, thanks. Roberts continued his successful spree of ship stealing for the next few years, with his crew growing fiercely loyal. To maintain order and morale, Roberts developed his own pirates code, a set of agreements and laws that would be upheld by every crew member, bringing law to lawless men. Roberts was also one of the early adopters of the infamous Jolly Roger's skull and crossbones black flag. Flying the Jolly Roger was a great way to tell your targets that shit was about to hit the fan should they choose to stay and fight. Most didn't. In fact, in 1720, Roberts and his crew made their way up to Newfoundland, entering a harbor with their black flags whipping in the wind. Any and all surrounding ships' crews abandoned their post and fled. Roberts took the town, 22 merchant ships, and 150 fishing vessels without firing a single shot. Across his entire piratical career, Roberts yoinked over 400 ships, making him the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. His plunder is valued in the ballpark of $48.2 million. His career was successful, but all good things must come to an end. On February 10th, 1722, a British Royal Navy ship ambushed Roberts and fired a volley of grape shot broadside. Grape shot, if you're unaware, were basically giant grenades, several small iron balls a few inches in diameter densely packed in a canister designed to take out enemy crewmen. Well, poor old Roberts caught a ball right in the throat as he stood on deck, killing him instantly. He was 39. As you can probably tell, active pirate careers were pretty short, and most died right when the getting was good. A simple rogue cannonball, splinter of wood, or a stray cough could cut down a pirate where he stood, and Captain Thomas II was no exception. Beginning his privateering career at the tail end of the 17th century, Tommy II was commissioned to ravage a French factory on the coast of West Africa. Sailing across the pond from Bermuda alongside one Captain George Dew, both men had a lot to do. But Mother Nature had other plans. Glad that wasn't us, right? Y'all want to be pirates? Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, sure. Yeah. I can hear you. Okay, yeah. Okay, yes. All right. I can hear you. I can hear. The two crews set sail for the Red Sea, an area chock full of wealthy ships seeping out of every orifice. Like that one. Tommy's first big score was an Indian sloop headed for the Ottoman Empire. The vessel was captured without much effort and was certainly one for the books. Hidden in the hold was millions of dollars worth of gold and silver, with millions more worth of spices, ivory, gemstones, spices, silks, and spices. Tommy too sailed to a pirate haven on Madagascar to divide the plunder before making his next move. Several months later, Tu grew a new crew and set sail to wreak havoc once again. It did not end well. While pursuing a 25-ship fleet leaving the Mughal Empire, Tu engaged one of the lagging ships. Said ship turned about to face his attacker and fired a volley of cannons. One of these cannonballs practically split two in two, disemboweling the captain and killing him instantly at the age of 44. Fuck! It is estimated that Tu's piracy career netted him over $151.9 million in captured goods. There is a lot to say about Sir Francis Drake, but this video is already getting long enough by my standards, so like an enthusiastic Tinder date, I'm gonna trim it up for you. Sir Francis Drake was an English explorer and privateer and one heck of a sailor, starting off as a humble seaman and eventually circumcising the globe. Well, that's not right. Oh, that's better. Very early on in his career, Drake grew an incessant hatred and distrust for any and all Spaniards. And now, before you think he's racist, it's because the Spanish wouldn't let him break into the West African slave trade. From then on, Drake vowed to attack any Spanish possessions he came across in the future, which he did. He started making good on this promise in 1572 by attacking Panama, a Spanish transfer site of silver and gold from the Pacific Ocean to the Caribbean Sea. Drake and his men raided the area. Despite getting shot in the leg, Drake made off with literal tons of precious metals, making him and his crew rich and famous practically overnight. It was also at this time that Drake became one of the first Englishmen to lay eyes on the Pacific Ocean, letting out an iconic English roar of excitement. Drake vowed that he would one day sail those waters in the future, which he did. Beginning in November of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and set sail from Plymouth to... Trying again in December of 1577, Drake was granted a fleet of 6 ships and sailed from Plymouth to circle the globe, eventually limping back home in 1580. Along the way, however, Drake made it his mission to be as disruptive to the Spanish as possible. Just 1 year into the voyage, 6 ships were whittled down to just 1. Drake's flagship, the Golden Hind. Making it past the southernmost tip of Chile, Drake began bombarding the western coast of South America, ravaging Spanish towns and seizing Spanish ships, one of which was the Nuestra Señora de la Concepcion, which housed over 29 tons of silver bars, silver coins, gold, and jewels. Drake was so tickled pink by this score that he spared the captured ship's crew, even gifting them small amounts of the treasure as they went on their merry way. Fast forward 2 years and 1 global circumnavigation later, and Drake's back home in England. The Queen knights him and everyone briefly claps. He then did some boring political nonsense before hopping back on the saddle and obliterating the ever-loving fuck out of some Spaniards, just like the old days. Speaking of old days, those are the types of days that Drake woke up to in his mid-50s. Still clinging to his youth, the withering and dusty seaman returned to Spanish waters back to where it all started, attacking Panama. Sir Francis Drake died of dysentery in 1596 and was hucked into the ocean in a lead coffin. Across his 33 years of piracy against the Spanish, Drake accumulated upwards of $170.3 million in goods and gold. Last on our list is the one and only Black Sam. No, this one. Despite being known as the single wealthiest pirate in recorded history, his pirating career lasted little more than a year. Black Sam was a real pirate's pirate and was renowned for his exceptional generosity and mercy as he boarded your boat and stole all your shit. The so-called Prince of Pirates began his career as almost all pirates did, in the Navy. During his teen years, Sam both metaphorically and quite literally got his feet wet in a few naval battles before branching off to a treasure hunting crew. But when searching for sunken gold didn't pan out, Sam chose to do the next best thing, a life of piracy. He managed to join the crew of one Benjamin Hornigold. Remember him? He's the pirate captain that Blackbeard served under in his youth. Well, as a reminder, Hornigold refused to attack English ships, much to the dismay of his treasure-hungry crew. Hornigold and Blackbeard broke away from the majority of the crew to go do their own things, like retire and die, respectively. The remaining crew, however, now turned to Black Sam Bellamy for leadership, and he took the job. About a year later in 1717, while sailing near Cuba, Bellamy and the boys came across the Witta Galley, a state-of-the-art English slave ship practically begging to be captured. which it was. After giving chase for 3 whole days, Bellamy was finally in range to fire a volley, and after the first shot, the captain of the Witta surrendered. On the ship was a fortune in gold, ivory, and various precious luxuries freshly gathered from the sale of over 300 slaves. The Witta was re-engineered into a flagship, being upgraded with more firepower for intimidation purposes, as Bellamy often captured ships with little destruction. It was also common that he would spare his captives, allowing them to flee on the very ships he captured, minus any goods of course. Can't make a profit on charity. His kind and reasonable demeanor granted him a very loyal crew, and it seemed like Sam had everything going for him. But fate had another idea. Just 2 months after the score of a lifetime, Bellamy sailed from the Spanish Main to the American Main. At around midnight on April 26, 1717, the Witta galley was caught in a strong nor'easter storm and was quickly capsized and sank several hundred feet off the coast of Cape Cod. Bellamy and all but 2 of his 146 crewmen went down with the ship.
Guys?
In 1984, however, 267 years after its demise, the wreck of the Witta galley was discovered, including Sam's treasure. Several tons of gold, silver, and gems were recovered from the site, as well as some human remains encased in debris. And these are suspected to be Bellamy's, though that is yet to be confirmed. Bellamy's exploits earned him a modern-day equivalent of over $177.5 million. That's about 0.045% of Elon Musk's net worth as of me writing this. Guess Sam should have worked harder. Secret spy gadgets, huh? You know all about the Cold War, right? It was that time between the 1940s and 1980s where the United States of America and the United States of Soviet Russia, or whatever it stood for, decided to really duke it out on whose economic system was superior for worldwide domination. Capitalism or communism. But since the USSR is nowhere to be found on a modern map and over 300 versions of Monopoly are available on the market, it's pretty clear who won. Now, it was called the Cold War because neither superpower actually fought each other directly. Instead, everything was just one big wiener measuring competition, from who could build better weapons to who could make more countries kill each other. But sometimes, sneaky measures were taken to get the upper hand, and that's where spies came in. Highly trained agents designed to infiltrate enemy lines and carefully yoink critical information from the other side, among other fruitful missions. But they needed to be creative in their method of extracting information to avoid getting caught. Good spies don't get caught. Perhaps the most common tool in a spy's arsenal was the hidden camera. In order to follow the cardinal rule of pics or it didn't happen, these discreet little lenses were used to secretly take pictures of sensitive documents or sensitive people without being too obvious. Eto na sumi secret ni documento. Really? Could you flip that over, please? Yes, of course. The clever cameras were carefully concealed in copious quantities of clothes and components like coats, coins, and cleavage. Perhaps one of the most effective types was the microdot camera, a tiny camera used to make even tinier pictures. About the size of a small coin, these little wonders captured images of full-size sensitive documents, but thanks to a special lens and some fancy physics, the resulting image would be scaled down to just a dot. A microdot, if you will. These microdots measured about 1 millimeter in length and could easily be snuck back into headquarters where they could be magnified and properly read. Gotcha. But taking pictures of a few confidential documents was small-time work. Sometimes you need to think bigger, like entire secret bases bigger. So in order to get a bird's eye view on the landscape, you had to do just that. That's where the employment and deployment of pigeon cameras came in. Specially trained pigeons that had big old cameras strapped to their chests and sent flying across areas where the camera could reveal potential bases and strategic locations. But if seeing wasn't an option, then listening was an acceptable alternative. It was a common tactic for intelligence operations to bug a room, meaning that multiple listening devices would be planted around said room or on an agent. But some smartass took the term bug a little too literal, which is how the dragonfly insectothopter became reality. But why oh why the dragonfly? Well, because a regular fly is too small and swattable, and while a prototype for a bumblebee was developed, it was noted that real bees are too erratic when they fly. And so if a couple of savvy sleuths noticed a bumblebee just kind of hovering around in the air, it was a telltale sign that your business was being recorded. Dragonflies, though, can kind of just hover for a while, and so it's a little less suspicious. Plus, their long, slender bodies were a perfect shape to house the mechanics necessary to be a microphone with wings. I'm sorry, how many missiles did you say in Cuba? Is there a lake nearby or something? But if you had insectophobia, then what could be the next best thing? This thing. The Thing. This vaguely named piece of woodwork was a hand-carved US Great Seal gifted by the Soviet Union to a US ambassador a few weeks before World War II ended. I guess the USSR wanted to get an early jump on the whole spying thing. It was hung up in the ambassador's private study as a way to passively listen in on conversations. But how? Hidden in the wood carving was an antenna that, although mechanically simple, was pretty impressive technology. Invented by Leon Tiedemann, who is famous for also inventing the theremin, that weird frequency instrument that goes off. This listening device had no power source or wires, rendering it virtually undetectable. No way. Instead, a remote radio frequency would turn on the device, allowing the Soviets to actively listen in whenever those perverts pleased. Classified as a resonant cavity microphone, it was basically a tiny diaphragm that would vibrate from sound waves of people yapping. Those vibrations are then transformed into a signal which was sent back to the Soviets. The device was so well hidden that it actually wasn't found until 7 years later. Yo Dave, check this out, the Soviets put a freaking microphone in the seal. Those commie bastards were listening this whole time? I'm gonna rip it out. No, wait. I have an idea. Time to listen in on the Americans. I hate my job. Now you might be thinking, man, microphones and cameras? That shit's lame on God for real, or whatever the flip y'all say today. Well, if I were mean, this is where I would put something loud to blow out your eardrums in retaliation. But I'm not gonna do that. Next up in the spy arsenal, sounds like an idea that someone just pulled out of their ass. You ever see like a Swiss Army knife with its super convenient and practical tools like knives and saws and screwdrivers? Now imagine if you got the sudden urge to just ram that thing up your anatomical back pocket for later retrieval in a pinch. Well, you're in luck I guess, because that's what the rectal toolkit is for. Hey, at least it's better than a glass jar. Used mainly by very brave CIA agents at the height of the Cold War, this toolkit was equipped with all the aforementioned tools needed to get yourself out of a shitty situation, all conveniently contained in a ribbed for your pleasure capsule. Although convenient, there might be a few obvious tells of the supportive suppository. Alright, the guards are distracted. Let's move out. I'm right behind you. Oh geez. Sometimes a spy needs a quick getaway. Luckily, there are plenty of opportunities at your disposal. Perhaps a spy's best offense was a solid defense of remaining anonymous and indiscernible amongst a crowd. Many spies were artists in terms of changing disguises on the fly to get any would-be pursuers off their trail. But if changing clothes didn't do the trick, then the 5-second mask would. This was a latex mask developed for quick identity theft on the go. In just 5 seconds, as the name implies, one could assume an entirely new appearance from the shoulders up, complete with facial hair and a hairline that screams, "I've got a mortgage, an unsatisfied wife, and 3 ungrateful brats at home." No enemy agents would suspect a thing, but they would certainly be sympathetic towards your new fake backstory, maybe even empathetic. Godspeed, soldier. But if you're still being tailed and need a quick diversion, it might be time to deploy the Jack-in-the-Box. Constructed from a hopefully unused sex doll, this inflatable fellow served as a decoy for a vehicular getaway. When getting Ubered away from a mission, you may get a feeling that you're being followed and need to quickly vamoose.
The enemy's coming in, you're behind. Do a barrel roll.
Assuming your driver knows the assignment and you tipped him well, he can quickly turn a corner while you delicately tuck and roll to safety. The Jack-in-the-Box is then quickly inflated where you were sitting, convincing your assailants that you didn't just take yourself out by slamming your dome into a street lamp at 35 miles an hour. However, there may be a chance where the jig is up and you get got. No need to worry though, they can't extract information from you if you're completely dead. You know that famous Pirates of the Caribbean quote.
Dead guys don't say things much.
The thing is, it's very unpatriotic to give up confidential information to an enemy entity. Traitorous even. So in order to not disgrace your home country that put you in this dangerous pickle in the first place, you have one last resort. A lethal dose of cyanide hidden in your false tooth. Just gnaw on that sucker like one of grandma's old strawberry candies to earn your one-way ticket to Sleepy Bye Junction. Now, if you've got the stones for it and you want to fight back, that's where the real fun stuff begins, with an arsenal of concealed weapons at your disposal. This first one really packs a punch. This is the Sedgley OSS 38 single-shot glove pistol, a relatively simple weapon capable of delivering a very simple death. See, with a gun, you pull a trigger and your point comes across pretty quickly. With a glove gun, you get to punch them in the face while you're at it. It's like killing two birds with one stone, but it's killing one face with a bullet and a fist. So when you're in a bout of fisticuffs and your opponent insists you give him your best shot, boy will he be surprised. For you ladies out there looking to discreetly apply a nice shade of red to yourself and a target, there's the lipstick pistol, also referred to as the kiss of death. This little guy was a single-shot 4.5mm pistol hidden in a lipstick holder used by the KGB. They were the Soviet equivalent of the CIA. Easily disguised as a harmless accessory in a handbag, this weapon could be concealed next to your concealer and make up the foundation of your arsenal. I would imagine such an encounter would go like this. Oh wow, what a lovely shade. What color is that? It's called You're Gonna. You're gonna? Yeah, you're gonna die. You're gonna die. Ooh, how exotic sounding.
How does it look?
Ugh, okay, maybe such tactics are a little bit messy. Let's shoot for something more surreptitious, like poison. Poison's great when you're not on the receiving end of it. If you don't want the hassle of dirty work to rain on your parade, you can opt for the Bulgarian umbrella. This clever contraption looks like a typical umbrella, but it isn't. Obviously. This umbrella Ella actually contains a pneumatic element which, when triggered, will launch a poison dart towards any target you desire. The poison of choice was ricin, a potent chemical which, when injected, will cause massive internal bleeding and organ failure, guaranteed to put a damper on anyone's day. The Bulgarian umbrella is referred to as such because the most famous use of the device was in 1978 when a KGB agent assassinated a Bulgarian enemy of the state right in the middle of the streets of London.
Is someone there?
I suppose if you really want to take aim at who you're pumping full of poison, then equip yourself with the ominously named heart attack gun. Revealed to the general public in 1975, this firearm was, as the name implies, capable of delivering one free heart attack by means of a lethal injection of shellfish toxin right into the bloodstream. The toxin was discovered by one Miss Mary Embry of the CIA. Her discovery also played a major role in Project MK Naomi, a secret US program aimed at developing biological weapons during the Cold War and a successor to the infamous Project MK Ultra. The poison was frozen into a compact dart and fired at a high speed. Once it penetrated the target, it would melt and be absorbed into the body. The toxin would spread and mimic the symptoms of an innocent heart attack. Only a tiny red dot was the evidence that anything malicious had even happened, besides a dead body. Something bad about every country, in no particular order. Sri Lanka's economy has been collapsing since 2019 thanks to a corrupt government and the evaporation of tourism because of the Big C. They owe about $51 billion to the world and only have about $25 million in the bank. Uganda has a terrible water supply thanks to being landlocked and a weirdly booming population. I bet the government will probably help out, but they're probably just waiting for the next Mr. Beast video to drop. Besides being an F-tier apex gun, Mozambique has one of the highest birth rates, but also one of the lowest life expectancies at birth. Good luck, son. If you have such bad judgment that you find yourself in Honduras, try not to get sick as they only have one doctor per 3,000 people. Take the economic approach and just be mugged and left for dead. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are still restricted in the UAE. Hold anti-government protests like we do in the US and you'll get stoned, not the good kind. Iceland has committed some of the worst political atrocities in history, from purchasing green beans to shooting protected ducks and even making rude comments. Over 90% of Gabon is covered in rainforest. The other 10% is covered in AIDS and malaria. When 18th century Serbian villagers experienced anything inexplicably spooky, they blamed the recently deceased, dug them up, and killed them all over again. They would call these bodies vampires. The entire country of Lesotho is more than 3,200 feet above sea level, which is pretty high, but not as high as having the world's highest self-deathing rate. Paraguay once lost a war against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay in the late 1800s. They then doubled down and kept fighting, only to lose over 2/3 of its population in the end. For over 500 years, the tiny island nation of Mauritius traded hands between the Dutch, French, and British, and they all dealt in heavy slave trade. Eswatini is the last absolute monarchy in Africa. Too bad it's still a dirt poor third world country. For over a decade, Haiti accounted for over 30% of the Atlantic slave trade, importing 40,000 slaves a year at its height, but then they revolted and won independence. Israel is a huge fan of huge walls, and not a huge fan of neighbors, but not calling out any in particular. Djibouti is one of the funniest named countries in the world. It's also one of the largest destinations for human trafficking. A little less funny now, isn't it? You think the Netherlands looks like this, but it actually looks more like this. Montenegro translates to Black Mountain, and is in fact not a reference to your friend Monte. Translating to the savior, it's exactly what El Salvador needs since it has been ranked as having the highest murder rate in the world. 68% of Tanzania's population lived below the poverty line of $1.25 a day. Minimalist YouTubers should take notes. Liechtenstein was the last European country to allow women to vote, in 1984. Nicaragua has no formal address system, so if you're trying to go anywhere, an address will probably look like third house down from the second left turn after the Taco Bell. Good luck, Amazon drivers. Sweden was a mighty empire in the late 1500s, but then they tried invading Poland. That no one has ever successfully invaded Poland. Sweden was no longer a mighty empire after that little stunt. Belize has a Bigfoot equivalent called El Sisamito, which runs around killing hunters and ripping off their thumbs. The country of Chad has a mad sharp jawline. It also has one of the highest mother mortality rates in the world. Malawi's president once sold off a private jet and 35 Mercedes-Benz to raise money for the country's economy. Too bad it has the third poorest economy in the world. Burkina Faso is an African country with the capital of Ouagadougou, which just sounds like it was founded by Adam Sandler. In ancient Italy, the Roman Empire was at its peak in the year 117 AD, or CE. Or whatever. It then did a 360 and fell over in the year 476. The last traces of the Roman Empire can be found across many middle-income shopping areas in the US. Seychelles by the seashore. Even though it's regarded as the Garden of Eden, it's plagued with terrible plastics pollution. Their saving grace is that their iconic sea coconuts are making me act up something awful. In 2011, Malta held a record for most people gathered dressed as storybook characters at 453, but then was obliterated by Singapore with 1,560 in 2014. Clearly, neither country has ever heard of or smelled a Comic-Con. Mali was home to the world's richest king, Mansa Musa. Now, it's home to the world's largest mud building. Colombia boasts a thriving coffee export, but they also dunk cheese in said coffee and sell you donkey porn on the side of the road. Take your pick. It already sucks enough being a journalist in general, but especially in Eritrea, where it is ranked last in press freedom in the entire world. Tuvalu is a tiny group of islands northeast of Australia with an area of just 10 square miles. Almost no one goes there, so who cares? Give it up for Tuvalu, everybody. Liberia had a crazy civil war from 1989 to 2003. Over 250,000 lives were lost, with most of the killing performed by child soldiers. Imagine getting 360 no-scoped by a 4-year-old, but IRL. Funerals in the Dominican Republic last a total of 9 days. 3 days of grief, 3 days of silence and reflection, and 3 days of acceptance. Just huck 'em in the ground and move on already. It is considered very rude to refuse food or drink in Ukraine. Be sure to take seconds or thirds of all the food that the US is paying for. In 1847, a quarter of Ireland's population kicked the Guinness-soaked bucket due to the infamous Irish potato famine. Potatoes rotted and the British government was neglectful as usual. 1 million people died. You know how it is. Denmark is home to some great social welfare programs and a strong education system. Too bad you gotta pay over 50% in taxes for it. The early 1600s was the darkest time in Russia's history, where a famine killed off a third of its population and then a war killed off another half of that. Good thing Russia's peaceful nowadays, at least. Bhutan used to be in complete isolation until the 1970s, banning any foreigners from entering it. Not that you could really get in anyway, considering it's just friggin' steep-ass mountains everywhere. I won't go into detail about Greece. Pause the video here and look this up. Just don't use a work computer. Bangladesh's capital city of Dhaka is ranked one of the worst cities to live in because of insufferable traffic, pollution, and density. Just like any other city, I guess. Guatemala was home to the longest Latin American civil war in history, lasting 36 years and resulting in 200,000 people getting Guatemala to death. Tragically, there are no guinea pigs in Guinea. It actually really pisses me off. North Macedonia used to just be Macedonia, but Greece bullied them into changing the name because a part of Greece is also called Macedonia. I don't know, man. Tunisia has some of the world's most beautiful golden beaches. It also has some of the highest domestic abuse rates. When Fidel Castro took control of Cuba, he destroyed and banned all games of Monopoly. Reports of family arguments plummeted overnight. Zimbabwe's economy went through the ringer beginning in 2005. The government printed a $100 trillion bill. In reality, it was only worth about 40 cents. Give it up for inflation. Austria's main exports are automobiles, paper products, and genocidal dictators. So when Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, he really landed in the Bahamas. He also enslaved almost all of the locals over the next 30 years. Costa Rica is home to a mythical demon monkey called La Mona, which screams at you from the treetops. Before he was president, JFK was marooned on one of the 992 Solomon Islands. He was later rescued by locals only to be murdered by his own government. The island was later named Kennedy Island. China is... But I gotta say, he does look like him. St. Vincent and the Grenadines sounds like the name of a shitty band. In reality, it's just a group of shitty Caribbean islands. I guarantee no one from Burundi will see this video because only 3% of its population has internet access. It's ranked as the poorest country in the world. Comment below if you're from Burundi. Turkmenistan is home to the Gates of Hell, a natural gas crater that has been burning since the 1980s. Probably why it's one of the least visited countries in the world. Cameroon is home to over 2,000 different ethnic groups and almost zero rights for women. The buttholes in Nepal decided to be the only country in the world to not have a rectangular flag, but I guess that makes sense for a country that still uses the caste system. The country of Panama prioritizes use of freshwater reserves for the needs of the Panama Canal rather than the needs of farmers. You can't eat boats, fellas. Or can you? In 1800s Portugal, Diogo Alves killed a total of 76 people by pushing them off of a 200-foot ledge over the Aguas Libres aqueduct. He was caught and sentenced to death by hanging in 1840. Côte d'Ivoire, also called the Ivory Coast, is the world's largest producer of cocoa beans through child slave labor. You can taste the sweat and tears in every bite. Yeah, Borat's homeland of Kazakhstan is a real country. Here, you can play the ancient game of Kokpar, where two men fight over a headless goat corpse on horseback. Real fun stuff. Being a nation of islands, the Maldives will be one of the first to get wiped out when sea levels eventually rise. But look at the turtles! Dominica's economy heavily relies on agriculture. This wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for all the hurricanes that just outright obliterate crops annually. One of the most popular and rapidly growing internet communication platforms was founded in Estonia. That's right, Skype. Everyone uses Skype. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, sending 10 billion metric tons of magma into the air and shifting global temperatures by 1 degree. But I have to use a paper straw, right? St. Kitts and Nevis was almost always home to tobacco and sugar plantation slaves until it was abolished in 1834. Oh yeah, and Alexander Hamilton was born here. In Oman, you're not allowed to spend more than 10% of your monthly earnings on alcohol, so when you try and fail, you'll be standing there like, oh man. Some Malayan citizens visit graveyards at night, providing offerings to the dead in hopes of receiving winning lottery numbers. Syria is home to some of humanity's oldest structures in the world. Some of these remains and ruins have survived over 7,000 years, only to get blown up by extremist groups. World-famous Grammy Award-winning singer Angelique Kidjo was born in Benin. Oh, you never heard of her? Yeah, me neither. St. Lucia apparently has a pretty bad police brutality problem, so best avoid going there if you want to commit crimes. You probably just get what you deserve. Nauru is another one of them tiny island nations like Tuvalu. Although it's so tiny, it is the fattest nation in the world with 88.5% of its adult population classified as obese. They've also never won an Olympic gold medal. I wonder why. Turkey has some strange customs with babies, from covering newborns in salt in order to give them resistance bonuses to placing a turtle under their pillows at night for protection. Muslims in Brunei are forbidden from marrying outside of their own religion. It's a crime punishable by death. I do, more like I die. Anyway, it's a holiday in Cambodia. It's tough, kid, but it's life. It's a holiday in Cambodia. Don't forget to pack a wife. Madagascar supplies 80% of the world's vanilla. Unfortunately, there are no talking animals like certain movies would have you believe. If you're a bad boy or girl, you can still be legally executed by firing squad in Indonesia. So think twice before you commit murder or decide to go into drug trafficking while touring the country. Palestine is the main reason why Israel is such a huge fan of walls. Also, people have been telling me about a free Palestine, but for the life of me, I can't find where to claim it. Micronesia is a slightly smaller Nesia than Indonesia. It's not uncommon for school children to be kidnapped in Nigeria. Since 2020, over 1,000 students have been abducted and held for ransom. At least it's a good excuse for not doing your homework. Yemen is home to the Well of Hell, a sinkhole that local legends claim is home to a head-stealing jinn. Turns out it's just home to snakes, crocodiles, but no Robin Williams genie. On average, each Luxembourg citizen over 15 years old smokes over 6,300 cigarettes a year. And they're only the world's second heaviest smokers, right behind Andorra. North Korea is best Korea. South Africa is home to a bunch of bums because it currently has the highest unemployment rate in the world at 29.8%. For comparison, the US rate is 3.7% as of this video. Mexico, America's pants. Stay in the tourist areas or the next time your family sees you will be in a live leak video. In 2018, Venezuela experienced a 65,000% inflation rate. $1 is about 3.6 million Venezuelan bolivares. Bahrain is home to the world's largest underwater theme park. The downside? Not a single water slide. Just a big dumb plane to explore. You can't fly that thing down there. Senegal was once the largest slave trading center on the African coast from the 15th to 19th centuries, and as such is one of the biggest cases of friendly
fire in history. Jamaica is a very superstitious country. There's all kinds of local legends ranging from ghosts that steal your voice to an enraged flaming bull that chases you for being out late at night. Germany. Uruguay has been consistently rated as the safest country in South America in terms of violent crimes. But that also means that it's the most expensive to live in. Safety comes with a price. Bolivia was home to the greatest lake in the world, Lake Pupo. Tragically, it has fallen victim to climate change and completely dried up. Is driving your gas-guzzling car worth the loss of Lake Pupo? I think not. Moldova is Europe's poorest country. With an average GDP per capita of only $4,551, it's no wonder why all of their smart, hard-working youngings are fleeing the country for better opportunities.
If you plan on proposing to a loved one, try not to purchase a blood diamond from Sierra Leone. It could end up costing someone an arm and a leg.
The previous leader of Suriname, Desi Bouterse, was the military commander during a coup in the 1980s. He was arrested for drug trafficking, served 11 years, and was then elected president for 10 years before being subsequently arrested again for murdering 15 political opponents. He's a real one. Alright guys, we're about halfway through. I hope you're remembering to stay hydrated. If not, here's your water break. Alright, that's enough. Lebanon has a crazy garbage crisis that makes even Los Angeles look sterile by comparison. Environmentalists have tried different cleanups, but the crisis remains, well, a crisis. For example, in this image alone, you can see all of my online gaming teammates. Despite being a group of islands, Cape Verde is one of the driest countries in Africa. In the 20th century, severe droughts and famine caused the death of 200,000 people. Rwanda. If you're in your 20s, you probably remember learning about the Rwandan genocide at school. In 1994, nearly 1 million people were slaughtered during the Rwandan Civil War. The only reason you know the capital of Thailand is because your friend punched you in the balls shortly after telling you. Somalians are huge fans of pasta, thanks to years of colonization by Italy. Australia is home to over 2,400 species of spider. Arachnophobes? Stay away. In 1997, Ecuador had their first female president, Rosalia Arteaga. Before being forced to resign, she served her country for 2 whole days. Singapore has some crazy laws. Here's a few of them. Walk around your house naked, chew gum, smoke, steal Wi-Fi, sing in public, feed pigeons, not flush a toilet, urinate in public, drink alcohol after 10 p.m., or be gay. It's also illegal to unalive yourself, though I'm not sure how they'd arrest you for that. If you want to name your child in Hungary, you're restricted to a list of approved names. Instead of torturing your child with a dumb name, you can instead grant your child a meaningful name such as Zev or Nolifer or Nurbanu or even Tablachka. Over the past 20 years, Trinidad and Tobago have seen an exponential rise in violent crimes, mostly against women. Come on guys, beat your meat, not a woman. In 1983, Sudan enforced Sharia law, subsequently banning all alcohol. The entire country's alcohol stock was dumped into the Nile River, so at least the crocodiles got lit. The national dish of Peru is called koi. It's just a whole roasted guinea pig. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's top executioners, performing 196 public executions in 2022, right behind Iran's 576 and China's unknown thousands. Azerbaijan is known as the land of fire because of frequent spontaneously combusting mountainside natural gas leaks. The Marshall Islands got completely dunked on when serving as a nuclear bomb test site in the 40s and 50s. The islands are riddled with bomb blast buttholes. The Central African Republic has been a complete shit show ever since gaining independence in 1960. Constant coups, internal conflict, and the like make this country a no-go. Antigua and Barbuda are 2 more dumbass islands among other dumbass islands in the dumb shit Caribbean, meaning it probably had slaves and was visited by pirates at some point. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, like most African countries, doesn't have a pretty past. The entire population was violently enslaved under the Belgian crown to farm and harvest rubber from trees. Africa really got the short end of the stick in history. There's a lot of things you're not allowed to bring into Uzbekistan. This includes, but is definitely not limited to, Monaco is the wealthiest country in the world with over 30% of its population being millionaires. Sounds impressive until you realize that the entire country can fit in Central Park in New York with a population of 38,000 people. There are at least 1.5 million cats that live in Cyprus, which means they way outnumber the amount of people. This is actually not a negative fact. unless you're allergic to cats. You're completely SOL if you have a toothache in Morocco. There's only one dentist for every 800,000 residents. Sounds like it's time to break out the pliers and do it yourself. Besides being the best country in the world, the United States is also the greatest country in the world. Togo is an African country. I'll give you a wild guess what thing might have happened there. If you're a masochist, you can voluntarily spend the night in the Karasta prison hotel in Latvia, where you can be interrogated, punished, and harassed as you sleep in a cold cell. Niger was the country you were terrified to pronounce at school, while some other kids were oddly excited to. Angola, African country. Slaves. Guyana was home to Jonestown, a lovely little town which had a sudden population decrease from 918 to 0 in a matter of a few hours. They drank the Flavor Aid and committed self-die in the name of Christian socialism. Vanuatu is a group of South Pacific islands, huge fans of cannibalism, with the last known case occurring in 1969. According to Vanuatu cooking practices, humans take 3 to 5 hours to cook. Still no guinea pigs in Guinea-Bissau, just citizens living off of less than $2 a day. Slovakia is home to the world's tallest cave column, which spans 112 feet high. How boring of a country do you have to be where this is a notable fact? If you want to learn about Samoa, you first have to consider the coconut and consider its tree. Also take into consideration Samoa's high obesity and heart disease rate. In New Zealand, sheep outnumber people 7 to 1. Be cautious. You never know when you're being watched by a sheep. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a single country but sucks as much as two. It's got some of the worst air pollution in Europe, high unemployment, and over 200,000 active landmines in walkable areas. The only thing booming here are your legs. We all know South Korea is the better Korea. I could watch those Korean street food videos all the time. Oh wait, something bad. In general, they're pretty racist towards outsiders. Because of this, South Korea is one of the least diverse countries in the world. There's a town in Mongolia named after you. Sadly, it's pronounced maroon, but that ruins the joke. Libya used to have the world's most boring flag. Then after overthrowing its dictator, they added some pizzazz with the symbol from Link's mirror shield for some reason. Must be huge Ocarina of Time fans. Barbados. Caribbean island, let's see. Pirates and slaves. Oh yes, but white slaves too. Enemies of the British Crown were sometimes sent to Barbados to live as indentured servants. The Czech Republic and Slovakia used to be Czechoslovakia but got divorced in 1993 to find new identities for themselves, leaving behind 15 million disgruntled children. If you ever visit the tiny island nation of Palau, you are required to sign an eco-pledge promising to be a good little boy or girl and not to cram straws directly down a leatherback sea turtle's gullet. Qatar hosted the 2022 World Cup. It cost the country $220 billion and 6,500 migrant workers' lives. All that to host one of the most boring sports in the world. East Timor, or Timor-Leste, declared independence from Portugal in 1975. It was then invaded by Indonesia 9 days later and sustained a 24-year period of violence and resistance, resulting in the death of over 250,000 people, or a third of the country's population. The Caribbean island nation of Grenada was invaded by the US in 1983 to stop Cuban influence and rescue US students who were studying on the island. The Comoros Islands off the coast of Africa have experienced over 20 coups since its independence from France in 1975. Speaking of France, you can get legally married to a dead person there. The practice of necrogamy was started back in 1803 as a way for women to marry their fallen soldier boyfriends. This allowed the weeping widows to become a beneficiary of their dearly departed's military pension. This way, both husband and wife end up getting the bag. In 2004, the monarchy of Tonga sued their court jester, Jesse Bogdanoff, a Bank of America financial advisor, for mismanaging over $14 million of the king's money on bad investments. Something Wall Street Bets joke. Brazil had a record-breaking 59,000 murders in 2017, with only 8% of them resulting in any legal consequence. Ethiopia is home to the cruelest place on earth, the Danakil Depression, which is the country's lowest and hottest region. But don't try to cool off in these pools. They are highly acidic water pools rich in salt, sulfur, and iron, so you'll just end up turning into soup. Although Croatia is stunningly gorgeous, it has the worst waste management system in Europe. Countries in the European Union recycle roughly 40% of their waste on average. Croatia is in the dumps at just 8%. Finland recently changed its Air Force insignia. Now it looks like this, but back when it was founded in 1918, it looked like this. Keep in mind that the swastika is an ancient symbol of good luck used across many different cultures, until some German buttholes tarnished the image. In Arabic, Iraq means fertile. Yeah. In India, more people have mobile phones than access to a toilet, so be sure to watch where you step. Since 1389, Armenians have experienced 17 different massacres, with the Armenian Genocide of 1915 being the worst, resulting in around 1.2 million Armenian deaths. Tour guides in Tajikistan used to scam tourists by charging them for Yeti sighting tours in remote valleys, though no Yetis were ever found. Papua New Guinea? No son, no Guinea here, just people practicing black magic. 50 to 150 witches are executed each year. Spooky. Ladies, do your best to avoid Afghanistan as it's ranked worst in the world for gender equality. While there's no female heroes, 90% of the world's heroin is produced here. Although Zambia is home to some of Africa's most beautiful landscapes, the city of Kabwe is one of the world's most polluted cities, stemming from decades of lead mining and smelting. Over 100,000 people have reportedly suffered from lead poisoning around the town. Ghana, another African country, more slavery, but the first to gain independence from colonists. Slaves broke their backs for centuries in Egypt so that we could have the absolute banger that is the Prince of Egypt. In Kuwait, you can bet on camel racing. Oh, that isn't surprising? Well, how about camels controlled by robots? Yeah, much more interesting now, isn't it? Robots are really taking all of the jobs. Not just a state in the US, the country of Georgia slopped out the tyrannical maniac Joseph Stalin. Something that not many Georgians are proud of. Meet Chatletics, my Mauritania-locked ultimate Iron Man. Oh, wrong Mauritania. If you speak out against Gambia's corrupt government, you might find yourself kidnapped and thrown in a pit. Talk shit, get the pit. Kiribati is a group of Pacific islands. With a mean elevation of just 6 feet above sea level, it'll probably become one of the first victims of climate change. Spain is home to a plethora of nudist beaches, which sounds great in theory until you see the people that actually go to these nudist beaches. Greenland is the perfect place if you hate neighbors, since it's the least densely populated country in the world with only 5 people per 100 square miles. Kyrgyzstan is just mountains, so I hope you like mountains. Sadly, there's still no guinea pigs, even in Equatorial Guinea. It's for the best though, cause they would probably just have to submit to the brutal authoritarian government. The Vatican City is the smallest country in the world, even though it's just a city. The Pope lives there, and that's bad enough. Although, it's gotta be said, it would make a pretty sweet GTA map. Iran experienced an unprecedented socio-economic surge thanks to the White Revolution in the 1960s and 1970s. Free education, increased healthcare, extreme distribution of wealth to the working class, infrastructure reform, expansion of women's rights, and so much more. It just sucks that all of the religious nuts took over and turned it into the less than ideal place it is today. Iran absolutely fumbled the bag on this one. Canada is America's hat, and boy do they love clubbing seals to death. Chile was home to Augusto Pinochet, one of the world's bloodiest dictators. He took power in 1973 and kidnapped, tortured, and killed thousands. But since it was in the name of fighting communism, world leaders were just like, Slovenia. It's boring as shit. The Republic of the Congo is not the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In fact, it is 100% less democratic, but has the same amount of Ebola. If you didn't have malaria upon entering Kenya, you probably do now. Laos is considered the most bombed country in the world after the US dropped over 270 million cluster bombs during the secret war in the 60s and 70s. Over 80 million remain on the ground, still active. South Sudan. It's like Sudan, but with a cowboy hat. Lithuania was once a world superpower, until it got top rope elbow dropped by Russia in 1655 and finished off by plague and famine. Now Lithuania just chills. Norway is home to many beautiful animals, like whales. Oh yeah, Norway leads the world in whaling. San Marino is a tiny country state in Italy. However, there's not a single olive garden to be seen. Guess what? There's guinea pigs in Argentina. While in Pakistan, try not to express any non-Muslim religious beliefs, or else you might catch yourself in prison on blasphemy charges. Religious freedom ain't too good there. The people of Belarus are pretty superstitious. For example, don't whistle in someone's house or you'll blow all of their money away. To mark the end of winter, the people of Poland burn and drown a doll of Marsana, the Slavic goddess of winter and death. The African country of Botswana is 70% desert, 5% elephants, and 25% AIDS. The small African islands of Sao Tome and Principe are major transit points for heroin trafficking. Consisting of mostly desert, only 0.9% of Namibia's land is able to be used for farming, so they have to rely on imports to feed the population. Romania is home to some of Europe's last remaining virgin forests in the Carpathian Mountains. Virgin nerds! Besides exporting crisp, clean water, Fiji used to be known as the Cannibal Islands, with the Fijian chief Ratu Udre holding the record for most humans ever eaten. He is known to have eaten almost 1,000 humans in his lifetime. Algeria is Africa's largest country, but only 12% of its landmass is populated because the rest is just stupid desert. Yeah, so a lot of those slavery-ridden African countries I mentioned, the UK might have had something to do with that. They also think this is food. Bulgaria is the most unhappy country in the European Union according to a 2019 survey, scoring just 4.8 out of 10 on the happiness scale. Portugal was second at 6.2. Although Germany is mostly blamed for the violence in World War II, don't forget that Japan invaded China and murdered over 20 million Chinese people using the 3 alls policy: kill all, burn all, and loot all. But anime is cool, I guess. Albania officially banned all religious practices in 1967 until the fall of communism in 1991. King Leopold II of Belgium absolutely devastated the Congo. He claimed the territory as his own property and worked it to the bone, collapsing its population by half due to starvation and exhaustion. Belgians are not too proud of their late monarch. In Switzerland in the 19th and 20th centuries, over 500,000 poor children were taken from their families and forced into farm labor. These children were called Waisenkinder, or contract children. The Swiss government officially said, "Oh, my bad," in 2013, so that's nice at least. Myanmar is currently undergoing a civil war since 2021 with over 44,000 casualties so far.
But since TikTok hasn't told white women to start protesting it yet, you probably have never heard of it.
Besides being the hardest song on Guitar Hero 2, Jordan is a Middle Eastern country currently experiencing one of the worst droughts in history. Everyone please send Jordan a soggy envelope of water to show support.
Dumbest weapons in history. War between humans is bad enough, so it gets rather depressing when innocent animals are dragged into the mix. But honestly, animals have been used in warfare for ages. War elephants, attack dogs, carrier pigeons, bat bombs. Wait, bat bombs? Yep, bat bombs. Just one letter off from being a very nice relaxing evening, the bat bomb is anything but. Dubbed Project X-Ray, the bat bomb was an experimental weapon developed by the United States for use against the Japanese in World War II. Initially thought up by a friggin' dental surgeon, no less, the bomb would work like this. You stuff a bunch of angry bats into a little canister. Mexican free-tailed bats to be specific. Why? Well, cause they're small and cute, that's why. But they're also very fast, which is probably way more conducive to the task at hand. These flappy boys can soar through the air at around 100 miles per hour. Okay, fast bats. Cool, got it. But how are they bombs? Glad you asked. There were actually little bombs just straight up strapped to their chests, of course. Each bat was equipped with a tiny 1-ounce incendiary device, which was just a small pouch of napalm that would detonate after a timed delay. So now you have your explosives. Just cram them all into a small capsule and find a target. Easy enough, right? Once the bat bomb was dropped over an intended target, a parachute would deploy, opening the bombshell and releasing over 1,000 bats. In theory, the bats would scatter across the landscape and look for places to roost and go sleepy by. Anywhere that a bat could squeeze into and honk some me-me-me's was a suitable target. Since the bats would likely spread over a wide range to multiple targets in the area, they would prove to be very effective little terrorists, as small fires would spring up across the city and be difficult to contain. So how did it do? Well, during a test run in a US airfield, hundreds of armed bats were accidentally released and took refuge next to, for perfect comedic effect, a giant friggin' fuel tank. Don't move. Though effective, Project X-Ray was cancelled because World War II ended before testing was fully complete. Maybe next time, fellas. Nuclear bombs dropped from the sky are pretty cool, but how about a bomb that you could bury in the ground waiting for victims to roll over it? Like a landmine? Yes, like a landmine, but a bigger, better one. Enter the Blue Peacock nuclear mine. Developed by the British in the 1950s, the goal of this bomb was to stop potentially invading Soviet forces from taking over recently war-torn Germany. You know, if they decided to do that sort of thing.
Oi, bruv, you want Germany? Well, come on then.
Oh, hang on a tick. Oh, alright. Yeah, come on then. It was a great exit strategy to render the area completely useless, as everything was now reduced to atoms and irradiated. I can't have it, no one can, said the British. So to level a whole city, these things had to be massive, and they were. Each bomb weighed around 16,000 pounds.
The bomb would lie in wait underground to be detonated remotely if any invasion took place. The problem with a bomb being underground and unattended is that a lot can go wrong. Detonation mechanisms could fail and refuse to detonate, or it could detonate prematurely like a bad date night. One particular concern was the preservation of the detonation mechanisms during the cold winter when the ground froze over. So what would be a suitable way to prevent a bomb from freezing? Well, you probably want some heat, but from what? Heated water? Not practical. Electric heat? Too dangerous. Wait, I've got it. Body heat. No, Ron, get off the bomb and put your clothes back on. Oh. I'm talking body heat from this. Yup, it was proposed that live chickens would be stuffed into the bombs to provide enough body heat to maintain operation during cold spells. They would be given a supply of food and water as they enjoyed their stay in the 5-star volatile vessel. In the end, only 2 of the 10 proposed bombs were ever built, but neither were ever detonated, and the project was scrapped after a few years of development. The Imperial Russian Navy was looking to revolutionize naval warfare in the 1870s. The basic premise is that the bigger the guns, the better the Navy. Well, to have bigger guns, you need bigger ships, but when you build bigger ships, they could probably hold bigger guns. But then why not just build even bigger ships to hold even bigger guns? Well, it's not that simple. By design, ships are rather narrow, leaving weight distribution pretty limited in a geometric sense. So why not widen the ship to be more, round? Surely that would solve the problem. No, that would just be a dumb design. But Imperial Russia didn't think so, and thus in 1874, many Russian rubles were put towards developing and building
The Novgorod.
This absolute unit of a warship measured 101 feet in diameter and was protected with 12 inches of plated armor. Equipped with 2 11-inch cannons, it was basically a fully strapped lily pad. Any good warship is fast with reliable steering. Was the Novgorod? Nope. By contrast, it was painfully slow and hard to steer. At top speed, the circular ship cut through the waves at a staggering 7.5 miles per hour. Slightly slower than the average male running speed, according to Google. And funny enough, with its circular design, recoil from cannon fire would often cause the ship to unintentionally rotate, slowing down any formidable suppressing fire in a warfare setting while the ship resets position. Not that it mattered too much because each cannon took 10 minutes to reload between shots. Despite her shortcomings, she participated in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, but was ultimately used for shoreline defense instead of active naval warfare. Her career was surprisingly long, lasting 29 years before being decommissioned and eventually sold for scrap. Even today, the Novgorod is regarded as one of the worst naval ships ever designed. The ship had many flaws, sure, but experimentation is how we improve as people. Or at least that's what they tell us. Ever have an annoying bug buzz in and out in front of your face, so you try to get rid of it by blowing some air at it? Yeah, not very effective, is it? And neither was the wind cannon. This 90-degree-ass silly cylinder was almost one of the Nazis' Wunderwaffen, or wonder weapons. Almost. It was a 3-foot diameter, 35-foot long cast iron cannon, and it worked like this. A bunch of hydrogen and oxygen would be compressed into the cylinder, and if you paid attention in any chemistry class, you'd know that hydrogen is very flammable, as the Hindenburg found out firsthand. Oxygen, while not flammable, typically makes fire bigger, so if you compress the two gases together and ignite them, you're going to end up making a big kablooey. All that air pressure needs somewhere to go, so it all rushes to the path of least resistance, which happens to be the end of this cannon tip here. It's essentially a giant potato gun, but instead of a potato, it's a giant air bullet. But how much harm could that really do? Well, during tests, the cannon was impressively able to destroy a stationary 1-inch thick board over 650 feet, or 260 Alaskan king salmon, away. So it didn't really do much. It proved even more useless against moving aircraft which fly several thousand feet high. You'd honestly have better luck just hucking rocks at the dang things. The cannon was only ever used in warfare once when it was installed on a bridge, and it didn't yield any significant results, which is why it's in this video. Look at it. Look how dumb it is. Even the Soviets were in on the whole experimental weapons thing in World War II. Everyone was really out there trying new things and seeing what stuck. Take, for example, tanks. Tanks are good. They drive around on the ground and shoot shit, right? Well, what if they could also fly? No, not like an airplane. Well, actually, yes, like an airplane, but only to make it to the battlefield quickly to drive around on the ground and shoot shit. Previously, tanks were haphazardly airdropped with their crew dropped separately, and that's just too slow for warfare. Enter the Antonov A-40 flying tank. It's a tank strapped to a glider. The operating principle is that these bad boys would already have their crew aboard while a bigger plane does the heavy lifting. Once approaching the battlefield, the plane would just dump its load, releasing the glider to the ground below. Once landing safely, the wings could be dropped and the tank could ride right into the heat of battle. The tank used in the experiment was the Soviet T-60, a rather small light tank typically used for scouting. But despite being classified as a light tank, the thing still weighed almost 6 metric tons or just over 13,000 pounds, so it was far from light. But how is this thing gonna fly, you might ask? The answer is, not well. In order to lighten the load and reduce drag, the tank's secondary guns were removed. Headlights and peripherals were stripped, and ammo and fuel were kept to a minimum, rendering it almost useless. In the end, only one T-60 tank was ever equipped with the glider wings and dropped. When it was tested, the tank landed rather roughly and 180'd back to base almost immediately. Those overseeing the project were all, this tank cannot fly good. And the project was immediately abandoned. Alright, there you have it. A bunch of
Don't forget the gun.
Wait, what?
Don't forget the gun.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got one bonus for you. Roll it. As an honorable mention, we have the Krumlauf, which will certainly make you laugh your ass off. This is a German weapon attachment used to theoretically shoot around corners. But would you be surprised if I told you it was extremely ineffective? The barrels would only get through a few hundred rounds before just destroying itself. Not to mention that the bullets would be shattered into fragments upon exiting this curved monstrosity. Imagine the last thing you see being a weird curved pipe coming around a corner before your melon just gets converted into jelly jam by Hans's Looney Tune-ass gun. I'd be pretty irate. Not that my face could express it.
Something weird about every country in the world.
Oh, that's weird.
A 9.0 magnitude earthquake rumbled Portugal on All Saints' Day in 1755 and was immediately followed up by several tsunamis and large-scale fires because of celebration candles being knocked over in people's houses. It was a rough day. Before it was called Benin in 1975, it used to be called Dahomey because it's where you hung out with all the homies. Thanks to legendary marketing, it is a common tradition in Japan to celebrate Christmas Eve with a feast of KFC. This video is not sponsored by KFC, but it could be. Like my toilet, Luxembourg has a big old duke in it. It is the only country in the world to be ruled by a Grand Duke. In China, it is illegal to reincarnate without explicit permission from the government. Imagine police just waiting for you right as you're reborn. Just don't be a girl. Niger is so cool that it has a dinosaur named after it. This complete doofus is called the Nigersaurus. Don't get any funny ideas about pronunciation. In Cambodia, geckos are considered very lucky. It is believed that the number of chirps you hear from your gecko friend determines your future marriage. 1 chirp is good, 2 is not as good. 15 chirps is the percent you could save on your car insurance. Ancient Egyptians had their own police force consisting of specially trained baboons to take down fleeing criminals. The African islands of Sao Tome and Principe are home to this big honkin' rock dog called Cao Grande or Big Dog, which marks the remains of an ancient volcano. Dominica's national dish is the mountain chicken, which isn't really chicken at all. It's the legs of the giant ditch frog. Yemen's cash crop is khat, a chewable leafy plant that contains cathinone, a stimulant which causes mild euphoria and excitement. Its effects are similar to drinking a very strong coffee. There's an old tradition in Slovakia called the Easter whip, where women are splashed with water and gently whipped with a willow branch to promote fertility and youth. But it just seems like it would be annoying. For those who will eat just about anything, a delicacy in the Philippines is balat, or fertilized duck embryo. Yeah, that's a hard pass for me. In 1969, Honduras and El Salvador battled in the Football War, which began after a heated football match, though tensions surrounding immigration were also a catalyst. The 100-hour war resulted in about 3,000 casualties. Alright, maybe football isn't as boring as I thought. Uzbekistan is home to the Murantau mine, one of the world's largest open-pit gold mines. There is no Danish word for please. Instead, they say vær så venlig, which translates to be so kind, which gives me strong Bioshock vibes.
Get this thing. Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and
Subscribe to Chat History.
Over 80% of the island nation of Nauru is now uninhabitable thanks to decades of lucrative phosphate mining. This is St. Vincent, and these are the Grenadines. They penalize homosexual practices, referred to hilariously as buggery, using the penal system. You get the joke. The United Kingdom is made up of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, so let's not leave them out. England experienced the Great Stink of 1858 thanks to a ton of rotting poo-poo and industrial waste in the River Thames. This prompted the development of a working sewage system. In Wales, only 30% of people can speak Welsh. The national animal of Scotland is the unicorn. Northern Ireland has over 20 miles of peace walls which separate Catholic and Protestant communities from each other. The Wodo-Abe tribe in Chad holds the annual Garawal Festival, where handsome stud muffins participate in a beauty pageant to an audience of potential wives. Right next door is Nigeria, Africa's largest oil exporter. The environment is shit, but the money is lit. In between the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis is a tiny landmass called Booby Island. Nice. The president of Equatorial Guinea has been in power since 1979 and has proclaimed himself a god, free of any consequences for his actions. Not exactly the type of ego you want as a president. The top-selling beverage in Oman is Mountain Dew. Who knew they were such gamers? The Dominican Republic military and law enforcement members are not allowed to vote in any elections to avoid power abuse. Zambia has termite mounds the size of small houses, but to termites, they're huge houses. Apparently, in Croatia, it's frowned upon to leave your house with wet hair lest you succumb to pneumonia. Huh, Ukraine looks a little smaller than my last video. Well, the number 4 nuclear reactor at Chernobyl exploded in 1986, forever tarnishing the image of nuclear energy. The United Arab Emirates is home to Dubai, where everyone just looks filthy stinking rich. But with free trade and no income tax, what else are you gonna do? Students in Bangladesh over the age of 15 can face actual jail time for cheating on exams. So would you rather face failure or jailure? 8 days after their infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan invaded and occupied Brunei to secure a source of oil. What an American move. Residents of Papua New Guinea used seashells as currency up until paper money was introduced in 1933, though some tribes still prefer using the shells. Remember, you can't eat money, but you can eat shells. The Mexican city of Mexico City is sinking at a rate of 20 Mexican inches per Mexican year. Within the last Mexican century, it has sunk about 33 Mexican feet. Moldovians love their wine, which isn't too weird, but Moldovians love their wine. The first weekend of October is a national celebration of wine. Bottoms up. Mozambique is the only country in the world whose flag is absolutely strapped, as it sports an AK-47. Guyana is honestly just straight up a Minecraft map. With a very biodiverse landscape, Guyana is home to a coastal plain, a savanna, multiple mountain ranges, and a lush rainforest. So you have plenty of places to choose from to build your first dirt house. Indonesia has so many islands. Look at all these islands. There are over 18,000 of them, with over 6,000 being uninhabited. $20 to whoever can find Penn Island. Are you a fan of communism? If so, there's an attraction in Lithuania where you can subject yourself to becoming a 1984 USSR citizen for 3 hours. Participants sign a waiver confirming that they will carry out any orders without objection or face harsh psychological and physical punishments. Workers of the world, unite! An Ebola virus outbreak in the 90s and 2000s wiped out 90% of Gabon's lowland gorilla population. Bummer. Liechtenstein has no army or airports, so it's easy pickings. Citizens of Turkmenistan love their carpet, so much so that there is an official ministry of carpet in the government to approve all carpet purchases. Under Sharia law in Afghanistan, men are allowed up to 4 wives, but unlimited side babes. South Sudan is the newest country on the map as of this video. It was formally recognized in 2011 after the end of the Second Sudanese Civil War, which killed 1.5 million people. Venezuela's minimum wage is about $6 a month, which is why Venezuelans can make a decent living farming gold on RuneScape, earning a few $100s a month. Argentina has a church dedicated to Diego Maradona, a famous football player from the 70s to the 90s. The parody religion is estimated to have over 9,000 followers, but the guy died in 2020, so where's your god now? The majority of Palestinian land is home to millions of olive trees, with some orchards being thousands of years old. Chile is home to the world's oldest mummies. The dusty Chinchorro mummies are believed to be over 7,000 years old. Suck it, Egypt. The name Sudan comes from the Arabic phrase Bilad al-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks. Hey, I didn't name it. Bahrain has a 400-year-old tree absolutely thriving in the middle of the goddamn desert. If this tree can make it, so can you. Motivational quote of the day. In Eswatini, it is illegal for any witch to fly their broomstick above 150 meters off the ground, which is why Eswatini will never host a Quidditch match. Palau is home to a very unique lake, home to millions of jellyfish called, well, you guessed it, Jellyfish Lake. What's cool is that they've all evolved to lose their stingers since no natural predators exist within the lake. Time to take a dip and slap a jelly. In Ireland, the Mick in last names means son of, and O means grandson or descendant of. So by that logic, McDonald's is the son of two Donalds. In 1974, Sweden sold 1,000 Volvo cars to North Korea for $73 million. The bill is still unpaid as of today and is valued at $330 million with interest. Probably best to just write that one off as a loss. On the Yap Islands in Micronesia, you can find large limestone discs called rye stones. These were used as ceremonial gifts and currency. Their value lies in what people perceive it to be. Kind of like Bitcoin. Poland is the world leader in exporting amber, which is used in jewelry and souvenirs. I don't know, something about this just really bugs me. If insects weren't enough for you, try some Vietnamese snake wine. The diluted venom adds a nice kick to it. Don't worry, it's safe to drink. Sometimes. In the 1870s, Belgians hired 37 cats to deliver mail, citing their magnificent sense of direction as foolproof. Didn't work out so well. If you're a huge fan of sand like you know you are, you can head on down to Namibia and visit Kolmanskop, an abandoned diamond mining town where resources dried up in the 1930s. Your Roomba is gonna have to put in some overtime. Since 2011, chess lessons have been mandatory in every public school in Armenia. Suriname is a South American country in South America, but the official language is Dutch. The Samoan Islands were split in 1899 between Germany and the United States. The US owns American Samoa, and New Zealand now owns Samoa. But it's all the same shit. The name Timor-Leste comes from the Malay Timor, meaning east, and the Portuguese Leste, meaning east. Welcome to Eastern East. Not just Gambia, but the Gambia. This African country was once ruled by President Yahya Jammeh, a bonkers dude who would perform literal witch hunts, torture HIV patients with dangerous fake treatments, and claimed he would rule for 1 billion years. He ruled for 22. In Nepal, cows are sacred. Like, really sacred. I'm talking clean your house with their poop sacred. Ah, smells fresh. North Macedonia is home to one of the world's largest crosses. That's cool, I guess. I wonder when they're gonna install the giant Jesus that goes with it. If you have a unibrow, you're considered very attractive in Tajikistan. And only in Tajikistan. Are you a witch? If yes, you might want to visit the Witch's Pond in Romania. Rumor is that Vlad the Impaler got his noggin lobbed off here, so it's pretty neat. Yakuba Sawadogo of Burkina Faso was an absolute beast. This guy stopped the desertification of the landscape by planting a forest using ancient farming techniques. He brought together communities of farmers and taught them this technique, preventing further erosion of farmland. And he did all this without filming it for ad revenue. Fuck kangaroos. Australia is home to more Arabian camels than Egypt and even exports some of them to the Middle East. The capital of Singapore is Singapore. You can purchase a private island off the coast of Nicaragua. Well, not you, but someone with actual money can. Latvia lost 250,000 people, or 12.5% of its population, by the end of World War II. Ecuador is home to the Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin developed his theory of evolution. But that's just a theory! Supported by evidence. The original native Jamaicans, the Arawaks, were almost entirely wiped out in the 1400s thanks to the Spanish coming over, enslaving them and coughing in their faces. Men in Lebanon are legally allowed to pursue physical relations with an animal, but they have to be female, otherwise it would just be ridiculous. Spain annually hosts El Colacho, the baby jumping festival. Men dress up as the devil and jump over babies lying on mattresses in the street. Watch out for the soft spots. Monaco is basically just a city full of circle-jerking rich folks. If you go there without 7 digits in your bank account, you'll be spit on like the peasant that you are. An island in the Bahamas is home to 20 to 30 feral pigs of unknown origin. They're a pretty cute tourist attraction, not gonna lie. Too bad half of them died because they ate sand. In Turkey, it's common for people to eat meat as a dessert. You can try tavuk guso, a delicacy made from milk, sugar, cinnamon, and shredded chicken. It's probably pretty banging. Kuwait has the highest valued currency in the world. 1 Kuwaiti dinar is about $3 US as of this video. Gotta love oil. In Libya, you can visit Ubari, a desert town that has a bunch of lakes near it. And thank goodness too, because boy am I thirsty. Oh wait, these are saltwater lakes. Greeks can spit on you, but it's for good luck, so wish them even more luck back. Canadians use bagged milk. You guys are weird. When you think of ancient castle moats, you might think of water infested with crocodiles, but Český Krumlov Castle in the Czech Republic used a moat of bears to deter enemies. There's even some still there today. Hungarian man Erno Rubik invented his famous cube and placed upon it a famous pube. Fancy breakfast? Better head on over to Belarus to celebrate Maslenitsa, also known as Pancake Week. Pass the syrup, please. Lesotho, or Lesotho, or however you want to say it, is known as the Kingdom in the Sky because even at its lowest point, it is over 4,500 feet above sea level, so it's like way up there. Trinidad and Tobago has a natural asphalt pit. This slop hole of road juice spans 99 acres and is 246 feet deep. Cyprus has a wishing tree. Simply write your wish on a ribbon or a piece of cloth and tie it to the tree and it just might never come true. Due to scarce resources, North Koreans sometimes use their own soft serve as fertilizer for crops.
Honey, I think something's wrong with the vegetables. They're looking a little shitty.
I know. You're welcome. US President Abraham Lincoln once complimented San Marino, so they granted him honorary citizenship. Paraguay's got a heck of a strong navy, especially for a country that's completely landlocked. The megalithic temples of Malta are some of the oldest standing structures in the world, dating back to 3600 BC, and they would probably make a pretty neat Counter-Strike map. You know the capital of Thailand is Bangkok, but that's only a nickname. The real name is this. In Morocco, the organ of love isn't the heart, it's the liver. Cheers to that. The national dish of Comoros is lobster and a vanilla sauce. Costa Rica has no army. It was abolished in 1949 after a civil war. The military budget was instead put towards education. Kiribati is quickly sinking thanks to rising sea levels, but now everyone has oceanfront property, so it balances out. There is no speed limit on the majority of the German Autobahn, so be sure to watch out in the left lane as I'm zooming past at 300 kilowatts per hour. In Colombia, you can find the Caño Cristales, also called the River of Five Colors, thanks to aquatic plants and algae. I swear the yellow's not from me. Between 1949 and 1989, the USSR conducted 456 nuclear tests in Kazakhstan, which wasn't very beneficial to the local population. Hey, it's the middle of the video. Time to hydrate. Back to the video. In Mauritius, there are tales of a werewolf who can transform into various animals. In his human form, he is covered in oil, making him too slippery to catch. Air pollution in Bosnia and Herzegovina sucks, especially in the winter months when everyone is burning coal and wood to stay warm. India has a skeleton lake in the Himalayas where the remains of over 300 people have been at rest for a few thousand years. In 2022 and 2023, the Tanzanian government approved the forcible removal of the indigenous Maasai tribe. This paved the way for a United Arab Emirates company to establish trophy hunting and elite tourism spots. Dick move, UAE. Andorra is a popular tax haven for many bounce-wow-wow webcam sites, but you shouldn't be looking at that kind of stuff. If you ever find yourself in Estonia, be sure to visit a local village swing, cause they look fun as hell. In Georgia, aka Sakratvelo, you can find Vartsia, a 6,000 room cave city. It just reminds me a lot of Markarth in Skyrim. In Kyrgyzstan, you can play Kiss-Ku, a horseback kissing game where you have to steal a kiss from your opponent. Kiss-Ku? No. Kiss you. Mwah. Malaysia follows a unique rotating monarchy system, meaning that 9 different kings rule for 5 years at a time. In Malawi, mosquito nets were distributed amongst the population to reduce malaria outbreaks, but everyone just used them to fish instead, causing a huge surge in overfishing. Falconry is a big deal in Qatar. You can even bring your winged friend on a plane as long as it has a valid passport. Who's my good little boy? There are about as many horses in Mongolia as there are people. Everyone needs a horse. Homes in Uruguay don't typically have numbers, but are instead named. What would you name your house? Americans love spending money, even money that they don't have. That's why the public credit card debt is over $1 trillion. Now, it's just gonna ask you a few questions. Thanks. Brazil is home to over 100 uncontacted, isolated tribes, the most in the world. One sneeze, and they're all gone. Bulgarian mothers will often tie a red thread on the wrists of newborns to protect them from evil spirits. Sierra Leone had an iconic cotton tree in the capital city of Freetown. It survived hundreds of years before a big ol' storm blew it over in 2023. Bhutan has a thing for drawing weenies and peenies everywhere. Here's them blurred because, censorship. Residents paint the floppy phalluses all over as a symbol of good fortune to fend off evil spirits. Ooh. Oh, gross. Modern-day Iraq stands upon what was once the world's oldest civilization, Mesopotamia. The Bolivian salt flats are something straight out of a dream. The calm, shallow waters provide a clear reflection of the sky and make for a darn good desktop wallpaper. Serbia has balls. Big stone ones called the Pavlin globes that are said to heal and grant the wishes of those who fondle the large spheres. Tonga is the only Pacific country to not be colonized, and that's a point of pride of the Tongan people. In the Netherlands, over 30% of Dutch women give birth in the comfort of their own homes. In 1492, the Spanish sailed the ocean blue, then invaded Barbados, killed and enslaved the local population. In 1498, Emperor Maximilian I was sick of hearing castrated men sing in his choir, so he formed the Vienna Boys Choir, which still exists in Austria today, with new members of course. Zayoli dancers from Côte d'Ivoire are easily voted the worst upstairs neighbors in the world. Despite being known for exporting crisp, clean water, over half the population of Fiji does not have access to crisp, clean water. Across the Chiang Cowan Plains in Laos, you can find thousands of ancient jars scattered across the landscape. However, no ancient cookies have ever been recovered. Switzerland has some of the most relaxed gun laws in the world, with 1 in 4 Swiss people owning a gun. As such, Switzerland's crime rate ranks among the lowest in the world. Start taking notes, America. Grab your bros, cause every Friday in Angola is Men's Day. Angolan men will go out, drink, and party, leaving their girlfriends and wives at home. If you ever want to look like a complete badass Rwandan final boss, you can adopt the traditional Amansunzu hairstyle. This instantly adds plus 20 to intimidation. Cape Verde was never inhabited until the 1460s when Portuguese explorers colonized the islands and brought African slaves over. Azerbaijanis celebrate Nowruz, a celebration of winter's end. Traditions include eavesdropping, eating salty cake, and putting apple seeds under your pillow. Ethiopians use a 13-month calendar, 12 months with 30 days each, and a 13th month with 5 or 6. This means Ethiopia is 8 years behind the rest of the world. The Solomon Islands are a great destination if you want to explore wrecks of sunken World War II planes and ships, because that's where World War II planes and ships sank. The Maldives have a flag within a flag. Pretty cool flag. Israel and Palestine are the best of friends and finally at peace. And then you wake up and wonder why you just dreamt about the end of a 75-year conflict. Botswana's Okavango River doesn't flow into a sea or a lake, it just kinda leaks out over the land. Just give me 1 second, excuse me. There you go. Snow is becoming more and more common in the Sahara Desert, with recent snowfalls being reported in northwest Algeria in 2023. Slavery was abolished in Mauritania in 1981, but wasn't criminalized until 2015, and as of 2016, there were still 43,000 known slaves in the country. Ever get thirsty at a gym and you gotta gulp down a few crisp glugs from an LK Easy S8L? In Italy, you can slurp that sweet, or dry, red good from a free 24-hour wine fountain found in Caldari di Ortona. Salute! In Guinea-Bissau, it's custom for boys of the Agande tribe to survive alone in the forest for several months as a trial towards manhood. In 2019, the Central African Republic was ranked as the world's hungriest country. So when your mom tells you that there are starving children in Africa who would love your unfinished dinner, tell her to cook better. Senegal has a tiny island made entirely from seashells. You're gonna wanna wear shoes or else your little piggies are gonna get hurt. Liberia was founded in the early 1800s by the American Colonization Society as a safe haven for freed slaves. Some Albanians hang teddy bears or stuffed animals from their rooftops to scare away evil spirits. Ooh. Aw, this is way better than Bhutan. Syria is home to the world's oldest known library in the city of Ebla. Have fun reading your rock, nerd. If you're like me, like I know I am, you know that you're going to die someday, so why not go out in style like they do in Ghana with a fantasy coffin? These unique caskets are sure to keep your family laughing as they huck you into the ground. Before the Zimbabwe dollar was abolished in 2009, $1 US was equivalent to 35 quadrillion Zimbabwe dollars. Beginning in 1598, Russia entered the times of trouble, which plagued the country with political turmoil and famine. It ended once Mikhail Romanov was elected as Tsar, establishing the House of Romanov. Mali is currently on year 12 of a civil war. Best to avoid Mali until they get that sorted out. Many residents of Guinea still opt for going to a traditional healer when feeling sick, and if things get really bad, the healer will tell them to go to a real doctor. Burundi is home to a vicious man-eating crocodile named Gustav. He is said to have eaten over 300 people, is almost 70 years old, and weighs over 2,000 pounds. He's a big boy. Christopher Columbus reached Haiti in 1492 to the warm welcome of 400,000 Taino people. 10 years later, the population would drop to just 3,000 Taino people. If you're in Iceland, nature wants to kill you. Wind, water, snow, rocks, volcanoes, they all want you dead. Djibouti is one of the driest African countries. It has no reliable freshwater sources, so bottled water could be used as a form of payment if you forgot your wallet. A treasure hidden by French pirate Olivier Levasseur is said to be somewhere in Seychelles. It is estimated to be worth over $1 billion. The One Piece is real. My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first. I left everything I own in Seychelles. Beginning in 1920, single mothers in France can be awarded medals of honor for raising more than 4 children. Gold is awarded for 8 or more children, silver for 6 or 7, and bronze for 4 or 5. Pakistan produces 40% of the world's soccer balls. Football balls. It is believed that HIV originated in Cameroon in 1908 after an infected chimpanzee was hunted for meat. St. Lucia is the only country in the world to be named after a woman. In 2007, Iranian officials arrested a team of 14 spy squirrels who allegedly wore recording devices. A dead pope once stood trial in the Vatican City, and I covered this in another video, so be sure to check that out. Wink. The Blue Hole in Belize is one of the deepest ocean sinkholes in the world. You couldn't pay me to go over that dang thing. Antigua and Barbuda named their highest mountain peak Mount Obama after the American president. Thanks, Obama. The oldest known instrument in the world, a 55,000-year-old pipe, was found in Slovenia. Yeah, good job, Slovenia. The island nation of Tuvalu makes bank by selling the rights of their international domain .tv to media websites worldwide, earning around $7 million a year from this alone. You think Twitch.tv meant .television? Nope, Twitch.tuvalu. Before Somalia was Somalia, it was called Punt, meaning land of the gods. Despite being 95% desert, Saudi Arabia has to import sand from Australia. Arabian sand isn't very suitable for construction purposes. In Vanuatu, natives on the island of Pentecost perform the ritual of Nangal, where they bungee jump off of rickety towers using vines as cords. It goes just about as well as you would think. The median age of the Ugandan population is about 16 years old thanks to low life expectancy but high fertility. Tunisia is home to the ancient city of Carthage. You know, the one that got its shit kicked in by the Romans a few thousand years ago? Yeah, that Carthage. The country of Eritrea has no official language, so go somewhere else. The formation of Panama over 20 million years ago is regarded as one of the most important environmental events to ever occur, as it has helped regulate ocean temperatures and weather conditions. Good job, Panama. Thanks to their Belgian colonizers, the people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo have an unhealthy obsession with mayonnaise. The Marshall Islands established the world's largest shark sanctuary in 2011. And boy, are those sharks happy. I mean, look at that smile. Myanmar is only one of 3 countries to not use the metric system. They instead use the Burmese system, meaning that there are 20 Kathas and an Althaba. Apparently, Montenegro has a fake prince. Stefan Chernitic has been meeting other royals and celebrities for years, presenting himself as Prince of Montenegro and Macedonia, but neither regions have had royal families for ages. To no surprise, Kenya pumps out some of the best long-distance runners in the world. In South Korea, age is done a little bit differently. You see, when you're born, you're immediately 1 year old, as it's your first year of age. And then you gain an additional year each January 1st on the new year. So if you're born on December 31st, you're instantly 2 years old the next day. Historians think the name Guatemala either originates from land of the plentiful forests or mountain of vomiting water. Hopefully the latter. The national sport of Madagascar is merengue, or bare knuckle boxing, and it's brutal. Oh, what's that? You thought Ireland was the potato capital of the world? No. Peru has over 4,000 different types of potato, from this kind to that kind. In New Zealand, you can find a big ol' hill with a big ol' name, and that name is... Yeah, I'm not gonna pronounce that. You do it. South Africa has a great chain of Christian Bible and religious text stores called Cum Books. Oh, gross, all my pages are stuck together. In 2021, El Salvador recognized Bitcoin as legal tender. Let's just hope that they all have diamond hands. The Republic of the Congo is where you would find the famous Pygmy tribe, an indigenous tribe whose members are unusually short in stature, with men averaging 5 feet and women averaging just 4 feet. It has only ever snowed in Cuba once in 1857. Poor Cuba. Grenada has an underwater sculpture garden you can visit on a diving trip. It's honestly creepy as hell. There is a Sri Lankan belief that if you do not satisfy a mother's strange pregnancy cravings, it will cause her to become weak and the fetus angry. So stock up on the pickles and the peanut butter. Half of the population of Togo practices voodoo, but it isn't violent and evil like movies portray. It's actually very spiritual. The world's oldest dam can be found in Jordan. The Jawa Dam was built some 6,000 years ago, but now that there's no water around, it doesn't look all that impressive. Damn. This is what it looks like when you visit Norway. This is what it looks like when Norway visits you. A group of Finnish students established the International Day of Failure in 2010. Those celebrating are to reflect on past failures and learn from them. The holiday occurs every October 13th, so if that's your birthday, congrats, you're a failure. Learned from it. So that's it for all the countries. I do have 2 honorable mentions which only have partial diplomatic recognition, but I had people ask about them in my last video, so here you go. Over 90% of Taiwanese people suffer very poor short-sightedness thanks to endless hours spent on screens and in the classroom. Taiwanese children spend less than half an hour outside each day. Apparently Kosovo is pretty pro-American, and that's all I need to know to say that Kosovo is A-okay in my book. Secret government conspiracies. Alright fellas and fellettes, let's kick this off with something silly. Way back in the late 90s, when my biggest problems were nothing more than navigating the Ocarina of Time water temple and keeping my Neopets from starving, the rest of the world had real problems, like nuclear problems. Big nuclear bomb problems. The biggest players in the nuclear game were Russia and the United States. A small handful of countries had their own too, but they weren't taken too seriously. In order to keep things relatively peaceful, both the US and Russia agreed to minimize their nuclear stockpile and stop irradiating random corners of the globe. Now everyone could sleep soundly knowing that it was far less likely for someone's sweaty little fingy to be hovering over a launch button at any given moment. But what if a less friendly country developed the technology themselves and used it as a last resort to end life as we know it? Your best move would be to proactively prevent that development, or at least severely hinder it. Well, that's exactly what the US tried to do in 1999 when it developed Operation Merlin, a covert CIA operation aimed at sabotaging any possible nuclear weapons development programs in foreign countries, specifically Iran. Why Iran? Simple. They don't like the US and the US doesn't like them. But what do you expect given the fact that the US overthrew the Iranian government in 1953 because of oil? Fast forward to the 90s and trade sanctions and terrorism have caused both countries to edge. Put them on edge. But the Iranian government wasn't dumb. They knew full well that a nuclear warhead or 10 would quickly convert their country into a glass parking lot. So in order to level the playing field as well as any opposing military, they would need to develop their own weapons of mass destruction. So whispers of an Iranian nuclear program began to make their way over to the States. No concrete evidence, of course, just a hunch. But just the fear that Iran would develop its very own shiny nukes and gain a seat at the big kids table was enough motivation to intervene. Hey, nice missile. Don't touch. Which brings us back to Operation Merlin. Now the plan here was to have US nuclear warhead blueprints accidentally make their way into the hands of Iranian officials. These plans, however, were sabotaged, sprinkled with tidbits of completely wrong information designed to mislead Iranian researchers down a rabbit hole of designing inherently flawed weapons. Imagine you were taking a complicated test. With just 5 minutes left, you realize, Oh no, there's a back page. Your blood runs cold as your pupils quiver in fear. Your pores pour profound portions of perspiration from pecs to pelvis. Just then, a soft sound licks your wax-impacted eardrum. Psst, here, your classmate yells. He hands you an answer sheet. You blush blushingly. With this presumably correct information, you manage to finish the test. And then you explode. Alright, that might not be the best analogy, but you get the idea. In order to actually carry out the plan, the CIA needed the delivery boy, which came in the form of a freshly defected Russian nuclear scientist. Plenty of those walking around thanks to the USSR just having recently bath-bombed away. This scientist would be given the flawed blueprints to a TBA-480 high-voltage neutron initiator. Basically, a nuclear bomb's firing pin. The blueprints would be sold to the Iranian government under the guise that they were stolen. But here's the problem. A lot of the details of the operation were on a need-to-know basis. Well, you'd think that the fella actually handling the plans would be given most of that information. He wasn't. In reality, the scientist was only given instruction to sell the plans to Iran, and he didn't know that the designs had been tampered with. So when he went to review the blueprints himself, he noticed some issues. Blueprints wrong. I fix. Yeah, in an innocent act of good faith, the scientist had ironed out the design flaws and proceeded to hand over the now correct blueprints to the Iranian government, unintentionally thwarting the US's whole operation.
You what?
That's right, the American attempt to derail the Iranian nuclear program had completely backfired and may have actually helped their nuclear research in the long run. But it has to be said that Iran is not known to possess any nuclear weapons in the current day, as far as we know. The only reason we know about Operation Merlin is thanks to former CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling, who leaked information about the mission to a New York Times journalist in 2003. He got a 3.5-year prison sentence for that little stunt. Operation Mockingbird should be no surprise to anyone, especially nowadays. A couple of years after the end of the critically acclaimed sequel to World War I, previously alive President Harry Truman established the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, for the sake of upholding American national security. And by national security, this meant just shooting ropes of American influence across the globe to protect American interests. Interests that would soon be threatened by the Soviet Union. Having just fought side by side as allies in World War II, both the US and the USSR quickly turned on each other thanks to ideological differences, thus kickstarting the Cold War. The USSR scrambled to establish a geopolitical foothold in now German unoccupied territories across Eastern Europe. You are German now. Okay. Now you Soviet. Alright. Not only did this grant the USSR expanded access to natural resources, but it also provided a sort of Ferris sheet, if you will, of communist countries around the motherland's Western Front. The United States, having just witnessed the abhorrent conditions under Stalin's totalitarian control, was all absolutely not, and sought to prevent any of that smelly communist influence from leaking across the rest of Europe. Alright, which one looks better? No, come on, Poland. Focus. But the very last thing the US needed was to have communistic influence take root and grow from within. So in order to stamp out that possibility, the US government needed to remind Americans just how good they had it. Capitalism good, communism bad. Enter Operation Mockingbird, a covert CIA operation designed with the goal of steering public opinion away from any communist influence. But a direct in-your-face approach wouldn't do the trick. This needed to be more subtle and appear to be coming from multiple trusted sources. The more widespread the idea, the easier it is to believe. Now you have to admit, the general population is easily swayed. That's why political campaigns work. But back in the 1950s or so, access to information was nowhere near what it is today. So many messages were taken at face value by the vast majority of Americans. If you heard from your favorite news sources that millions had died under Stalin's communist regime and that communism was spreading to the US, you're gonna shit a brick. If your favorite movies portrayed communists as evil little minions who want to steal your freedoms, you're gonna be one pissed off Polly. The only good commie is one that ain't alive no more. I'll work on that later. There's probably no better way to control the masses than by fear and anger. Under Operation Mockingbird, the CIA had infiltrated the majority of the US's main media outlets, including news broadcast stations, journals, magazines, newspapers, movies, and radio, planting anti-communist propaganda and focusing the narrative on good old American values.
The CIA had hundreds of members of the press, including many higher-up publishers and editors from across the nation, secretly on the government payroll from the 1950s to the 1970s. These reporters and journalists would discreetly gather information about public opinion and disseminate CIA-authored pro-American, anti-Soviet stories, even if they were a bit over-exaggerated. It was essentially the country's first wide-scale fake news factory. If you read any kind of news article in the time, chances are it was written, or at least heavily edited, by the CIA.
You are fake news.
The anti-communist propaganda had caused mass hysteria across the US, resulting in incidents like the Red Scare, which had Americans pitted against each other. You just never knew if your friendly, well-groomed, handsome neighbor was secretly a communist sympathizer.
Oh, hey, Todd. Yeah, I'm just watering my flowers, making sure they're all getting watered equally. I bet they'd probably water themselves if I gave them the hose.
By the 1970s, Americans started to actually think a bit for themselves. With recent disasters like the Vietnam War and Nixon's Watergate scandal, government trust was in a bear market, and the public was buying puts. As an execution of checks and balances, the US Senate had unanimously approved the formation of the Church Committee in 1975. This committee, which consisted of 11 politicians and lawyers, was tasked with exposing the many suspected abuses of the CIA. And with their research, they blew the whistle on many of the CIA's horrid atrocities, bringing them right into the public spotlight. These included the notorious Project MKUltra, various assassination attempts on foreign leaders, attempts at overthrowing foreign governments, and of course, Operation Mockingbird.
So, what do you have to say to accusations of CIA propaganda? I'd say that you could take a propaganda at my asshole, Senator.
After the jig was up, the CIA claimed that all operations had ceased on the Mockingbird front, but of course, we know that that's not true. Nowadays, every one of us has access to more information than we could possibly process in a lifetime. Each article, video, post, blog, algorithm, just a potential gateway to subliminal messaging and swaying our decisions. Operation Northwoods is one of those things where you'd ask yourself, the US government wouldn't really do that, would they? Yes. Yes, they would. Back in 1959, communism had hit too close to home for the United States. Just outside the Gulf of whatever this is now, trouble was a-brewing in Cuba. That would be the Cuban Revolution, headed by this scraggly little scoundrel. Having just overthrown a corrupt, fascist, and US-approved government rife with economic inequality, Castro sought to even the odds for his fellow Cubans moving forward. His answer? Communism, specifically the Marxist-Leninist flavor. But no matter the type of communism, the US wasn't too keen on having a communist nation a stone's throw away from the tip of its dongle. It also didn't help that Castro had seized control of all American businesses in Cuba, including sugar and coffee plantations and oil refineries. In response, five-star General President Eisenhower had slammed the communist government with strict restrictions on trade and vowed to cast Castro aside. But that was another president's job. In 1961, shiny new President John F. Kennedy had attempted to huck Castro out of Cuba with the Bay of Pigs invasion. A group of about 1,500 anti-Castro Cuban revolutionaries were taken in, trained, and had millions of American dollars worth of military equipment thrown at them. Here, go kill Castro. And so they tried. The Bay of Pigs invasion, though, was an embarrassing failure. The Cuban military, over 200,000 strong, completely decimated the paltry invading force in just a few days. Now, having just warded off what he knew was essentially a US invasion, Castro felt a bit big in his britches. The US needed a better plan, but they were limited with what they could actually do. Since Cuba was buddy-buddy with the big communist motherland, a direct invasion by the US would almost certainly mean a Soviet invasion in Europe, so President Kennedy needed to really use his head for this one. But it was actually his brother that authored a solution. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy developed Operation Mongoose, a covert CIA operation designed to take down Castro's Cuba from the inside. CIA-funded Cubans would be recruited in Miami and dumped in Cuba to form a revolutionary militia. The US would influence political support for the would-be revolutionaries, which would lead to an eventual coup and usurp Castro, giving the US the chance to shape the government however they wanted. But a key part of that plan was to convince other nations that Cuba was wild, irrational, and dangerous, to the point of supporting US intervention. This is where Operation Northwoods comes in, a proposed CIA covert false flag flag operation aimed at executing domestic and foreign acts of terror against innocent civilians in order to justify aggressive US military action against Cuba. Some of the proposed terrorist acts included destroying a US ship and conducting fake funerals, attacking Cuban refugees seeking haven in Miami, planting plastic bombs in strategic locations in Miami, destroying Dominican Republic crops and planting false evidence, and staging attacks on US aircraft. And the list goes on. But the most damning evidence comes straight from the source. Here's an excerpt from the declassified Operation Northwoods document, highlighting a plan to fake a plane hijacking. Hijacking attempts against civil air and surface craft should appear to continue as harassing measures condoned by the government of Cuba. It is possible to create an incident which will demonstrate convincingly that a Cuban aircraft has attacked and shot down a chartered civil airliner en route from the United States to Jamaica, Guatemala, Panama, or Venezuela. The passengers could be a group of college students off on a holiday. An aircraft at Eglin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered as an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft. The duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with the selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. The actual registered aircraft would be converted to a drone. The document goes on to explain how both planes would follow the same flight path, with the duplicate passenger-carrying craft secretly landing and safely evacuating all passengers. This plane would then be reverted back to its original appearance. The original empty plane would then continue its flight path over Cuba. Once in Cuban airspace, fake pilot radio transmissions would play, declaring that the plane was under attack by Cuban aircraft. The transmission would then be cut off by the plane's remote detonation, simulating its destruction by Cuban forces. The culmination of these events would undoubtedly rally Americans against the Cuban government, justifying and essentially greenlighting an American invasion. But then a little thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. Turns out that the Soviet Union had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is hilarious, because the United States secretly installed nuclear missiles in Turkey. This was the closest the world ever came to an actual nuclear apocalypse. In order to avoid mutual destruction, the Soviets agreed to dismantle their nukes under the condition that the US dismantled their own nukes and cease all military aggression against Cuba. And with that agreement, Operation Mongoose was terminated and Operation Northwoods was shelved, hopefully never inspiring any future events. Operation Paperclip. Even if you're not a history junkie, you've probably heard of this. This is where US government ethics completely disintegrated like a big green fart in the wind. The Second World War wasn't one of just military strength, but of cunning, intelligence, and ingenuity as well. Emerging technologies gave each side advantages on the war front. The UK with its code-breaking Colossus computer, Germany with its devastating V2 rocket technology, and of course the US with its catastrophic atomic bombs. Nazi Germany had some of the greatest scientific minds of the modern age. It's an indisputable fact. And after Germany's surrender, the US wanted to leverage that expertise for its own technological advancements. Of course, there was also a concern that the Soviets would attempt the same thing, so it became a matter of national security. Well, the Soviets did end up yoinking over 2,500 scientists and various equipment for themselves under Operation Oswiecim, but no one ever really talks about that. In July of 1945, a mere 2 months after the May Mustache himself downed a pill and a bullet, Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip, had commenced. An operation designed to scoop up Nazi scientists from Germany, seize their research and technologies, and grant them asylum in the US so they can help develop weapons against Japan, who was still very much determined to win the Pacific Theater. Something they'll retrospectively regret in about a month. Most of the scientists recruited were experts in the fields of rocket science, aviation, and chemical and biological warfare. Over 1,600 Nazi scientists were recruited into the American scientific community and given research jobs. That would be a hell of a resume. Okay, looks like it says here you held a position for a bit in Auschwitz, hope I'm saying that right, as a camp counselor. Why don't you tell me more about that? No, that's okay. Operation Paperclip had absorbed some of the most prominent figures of the German scientific community. For example, you had Hubertus Struckhold, an aeronautical medical researcher. He was recruited into NASA and went on to design critical astronaut protective equipment for various spaceflight missions. During World War II, however, he was complicit in several human experiments at the Dachau concentration camp. There was also Heinz Haber, an aeronautical physicist that also participated in human experimentation efforts to further his research. Haber eventually became the chief scientific consultant for the Walt Disney Company in the 1950s. And of course, there was former SS officer Werner von Braun, Germany's leading rocket technology engineer who helped design the V-2 rocket through brutal slave labor. He became a NASA director and one of the most prominent figures in the American space frontier. He also worked with the Walt Disney Company to popularize the subject of human space travel. With American scientists now welcoming their new, funny-talking coworkers of questionable origin, the US had some cleaning up to do. See, the American public had zero knowledge of Operation Paperclip's existence, so it was up to the government to rebrand these Nazis as good old wholesome geniuses who all coincidentally wave at a 45-degree angle. Histories were hidden and war crimes were scrubbed for the sake of technological progress. And boy oh boy was there progress. With the help from the Germans, the US made unprecedented breakthroughs in aeronautical technology, largely contributing to the US's success in the space race against the Soviet Union with the Apollo missions. Over the following decades, however, many of Operation Paperclip's beneficiaries found themselves in the crosshairs of American journalists. Previously buried pasts were soon dug up, and links to war crimes were being reconnected. Fearing persecution and eventual prosecution, many of the scientists got the hell out of the US to seek refuge elsewhere. Although rumors of paperclips circulated as early as 1946, the official documents were formally declassified under President Clinton's Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act of 1998.
Something bad about every US state, in no particular order. Hawaii is our most recent state added to the Big 50 in 1959. The US government had their eyeballs all over the little group of islands as a strategic military outpost in the 1800s. Not to mention the sugarcane plantations. Freedom forbid any smelly European or Asian countries get their grubby paws on it, so with that in mind, as well as wanting to circumvent any potential sugar tariffs, a couple of US businessmen with a couple of US Marines pointed a couple of their US guns at Hawaiian King Kalakaua in 1887, forcing him to sign over power to the United States. But after the king kame'd his last hame, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, tried to regain power, but the US was all, ha! So one cuckoo kachu later, and the Republic of Hawaii was established in 1894, led by one Sanford Dole, whose cousin would go on to form the Hawaiian Pineapple Company, which would later become the Dole Food Company. If you've never had it, Dole Whip is freaking amazing. Highly recommend it. Ground zero for the 1918 influenza pandemic, the deadliest pandemic of the modern world, is widely believed to have been Camp Funston in Manhattan, Kansas. The camp itself was an army base training infantry in the closing months of World War I. Well, with failure to quarantine sick troops, the flu was definitely not just in Kansas anymore. Sickly soldiers were sent overseas where they oversneezed in Europe, spreading the flu worldwide. By the end of the pandemic around 1921, roughly 500 million people around the globe had been infected, with death toll estimates ranging from 50 to 100 million poor souls. July 16, 1945 saw the detonation of the world's first nuclear weapon at the Trinity Nuclear Testing Site in the Jornada del Muerto Desert in New Mexico. The successful detonation was the catalyst for the construction of the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan towards the end of World War II. It's just a shame that thousands of New Mexico locals were never warned about the testing because they caught some heavy radiation dosages. Between the years of 1948 and 1975, the Aberdeen Proving Ground facility in Aberdeen, Maryland, hosted a wealth of unethical human experiments on US Army soldiers. About 7,000 soldiers were experimented on, all without informed consent, meaning that they had no idea what they were getting into. The men were exposed to over 250 different chemical weapons, including mustard gas, deadly nerve agents, and psychoactive substances for the sake of researching effects, preventative measures, and medical treatments. Despite the lethality of some of these substances, dosages were low enough where no deaths were reported. These are getting dark really quick. So here's a silly one. The Aroostook War of 1838 was a bloodless armed standoff between American and British Canadian lumberjacks. While they slept all night and worked all day, there was a disagreement about where the US-Canadian border actually was. So both sides, eager to chop into the Aroostook River Valley's supple, sappy trees, got into a bit of a kerfuffle. Troops were deployed, but no shots were fired and no lives were lost. Instead, everyone skipped and jumped home to cut down trees on their respective sides. The 1974 super outbreak was one of the most intense tornado outbreaks in recorded history, with 147 separate tornadoes formed in a 25-hour period across 13 states, with Indiana being hit the hardest. 47 fatalities, 1,000 injuries, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damages were reported. That blows. Just slightly west of Virginia is West Virginia, home to the worst mining disaster in the history of the United States, so far. On December 6, 1907, the Fairmont Coal Company's number 6 and number 8 mine shafts in the town of Monongah went kablooey. 2 separate methane explosions instantly killed hundreds of workers in the mines and trapped any of those fortunate enough to survive, but their luck quickly ran out. The combined blast collapsed most of the existing cave structure and the ventilation shaft, blocking off fresh air and building up toxic gases which suffocated the trapped miners. The lack of any safety standards or respiratory safety equipment made rescue attempts hopeless. Only 5 men managed to be saved, with 362 lives lost. The tragedy sparked public outcry for stricter safety standards, and in 1910, the US government established the Bureau of Mines with the goal of reducing mining accidents, though it had been a few decades before any safety standards would be enforced. Bet you don't yearn for the mines anymore, do you? In 1879, members of the Osage Native tribe struck oil on their reservation. The US government did what it does and quickly swooped in to establish oil production and paid out royalties to the members of the Osage tribe, catapulting them to astronomical levels of wealth. And that's when the mysterious deaths started. You see, Congress, not believing that the natives were capable of managing their wealth by themselves, appointed American businessmen and lawyers to look after their finances as legal guardians. Well, throughout the 1920s, some of these guardians began the systematic murder of 60 Osage natives in order to inherit their wealth. Formal investigations were launched, becoming one of the first major investigations conducted by the FBI. If you want to read more about this, I highly recommend the book Killers of the Flower Moon. There was also a film adaptation done recently, but it apparently wasn't as good. Louisiana. In the early 1900s, there was a plethora of invasive water hyacinths just gunking up the local rivers. Not to mention a pervasive meat shortage. So in order to feed 2 birds with 1 stone, the American Hippo Bill was proposed to Congress. The bill would import African hippos to munch on the plants, only for said hippos to be subsequently munched on by Americans. Other animals were on the list, including Manchurian pigs, African buffalo, Tibetan yaks, rhinos, and of course, dicks. Sadly, the bill never passed, thwarting American plans to deep throat delicious and nutritious dick meat. A series of massive earthquakes completely rocked southeast Missouri in 1811. One 8.0 magnitude earthquake was so severe that it caused sections of the Mississippi River to flow backwards and several parts of the surrounding landscape to go all bleh. Some people died, probably. On April 12, 1861, those gosh dang Confederates bombarded Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina for 34 hours straight and 0 hours gay, marking the start of the United States Civil War, which would go on to claim the lives of nearly 700,000 people. The worst massacre in US history involving a school dates all the way back to 1927 in the small town of Bath, Michigan. Local disgruntled douche Andrew Kehoe used dynamite to destroy the Bath Consolidated School, an expensive upgrade to the local school district. The construction and maintenance of the school caused local property taxes to shoot up to account for operating costs. Kehoe, who was already on edge from his failing farming and political careers, as well as a terminally ill wife, had hit a breaking point with the steeper tax burden. Over the course of several months, Kehoe had managed to purchase multiple crates of dynamite, something typically used in farming at the time for stump and boulder removal, and hid them throughout the school. On the morning of May 18, 1927, the dynamite was detonated, killing 38 in the process and injuring dozens more. While the chaos ensued, Kehoe had murdered his wife, destroyed his own farm, and drove to the school with his truck packed with more dynamite. He parked his car in front of the school and detonated the truck, taking himself and a few bystanders out with him. Luckily though, a second hoard of dynamite within the school failed to detonate, preventing further loss of life. This single tragedy had claimed a quarter of the town's children.
California, the United States' sweaty ass crack, boasts the largest economy in the country, which is perfect, because that's what they need to constantly fund relief efforts for the thousands of wildfires each year burning millions of acres. In 2020 alone, California saw over 9,600 wildfires with almost 4.4 million acres reduced to char. Do better. Get wetter. Extremely heavy and frequent rainfall in 1926 through 1927 culminated in the Great Mississippi River Flood of 1927. The big ol' river traveled across the land, flooding far and wide through several states including Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and of course, Mississippi. Around 500 souls were washed away and several hundred thousands of people were displaced from their homes, resulting in upwards of $10 billion in damages. The U.S.-Dakota War of 1862 in Minnesota resulted in the largest public execution in United States history. The people of the Dakota Native American tribe were pretty darn pissed as incoming settlers sought to manifest their destiny across the Midwest. After constant displacement and being on the brink of starvation due to poor farming and hunting conditions, the Dakota had just about enough. A small group of Dakota men had attacked and killed 5 settlers, including a man, his wife, and their teenage daughter. This escalated into a small uprising which was stomped out by the US Volunteer Army over the course of about a month and a half. Over 350 US civilians were massacred, with 150 Dakota natives killed in the clash. After all was said and done, 400 Dakota men faced trial, with 303 sentenced to death, though President Lincoln did reduce this down to just 38 men sentenced for execution. These men received their short drop and a sudden stop in front of a public crowd on December 26, 1862. Since 2007, over 20 detached and decayed human feet had been washed ashore along the coast of the Salish Sea in northeastern Washington. The feet had been found in various shoes, supposedly protected from additional predation from scavengers. Several of the feet have been identified as remains of missing people or those suspected of ending their own life within the area. Pretty sad, but hey, free shoes. In perhaps the worst lapse of judgment in the history of mankind, the city of Cleveland, Ohio organized Balloon Fest in 1986. The goal of the event was to break a world record of most balloons released simultaneously, but I guess no one realized that balloons don't rise in perpetuity. Shortly after the release of over 1.5 million inflatables, a storm system promptly blew the elastic spheres back to Earth, blanketing the city and polluting Lake Erie. Airplanes were grounded, fishermen went missing, waterways became clogged, and many lawsuits were issued. All in all, the cleanup cost the city of Cleveland over $5 million. The people of Oregon really hate it when you pronounce it as Oregon, so I've experienced. But anyway, a few months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, a single Japanese pilot flew a secret mission to bomb the forests of Oregon in an attempt to divert war supplies. Incendiary bombs were dropped in the forests of Brookings, but in terms of damage, they didn't do jack shit.
Thanks.
After the war, the Japanese pilot, Nobuo Fujita, was invited back to Brookings as a guest of honor in order to make amends, which he hesitantly accepted. As a formal apology for his actions, Fujita presented the city his family heirloom katana, one passed down across 400 years, which is still on display in the Chetco Public Library to this day. Timothy Treadwell was a huge fan of wild grizzly bears. Keyword being was. He spent about 13 summers living amongst them in Alaska. Returning one final time towards the end of autumn, the bears then became a huge fan of Timothy. One giant grizzly had attacked Timothy and his girlfriend, mauling and eating the couple. The bear was later shot and killed, with an autopsy confirming human remains in its stomach. Fellas, don't befriend giant wild animals. I don't care how cute their ears are. They're wild animals. They will murder you. North Carolina almost became No Carolina in 1961 after a B-52 bomber carrying a payload of 2 nuclear bombs headed towards the Canadian Arctic experienced a catastrophic failure and broke up mid-air shortly after takeoff. The destroyed aircraft unintentionally dropped the bombs back down to Earth, with one falling from the plane as if properly deployed, initiating a sequence of safety switches for detonation. However, one final safety switch failed to actuate, saving North Carolina and a few surrounding states from becoming nothing more than a big black smudge on the globe. The other bomb slammed into the earth, but very luckily remained intact and relatively undamaged. Both bombs were rated as 3.8 megaton bombs, about 250 times more powerful than those dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. So yeah, the US almost accidentally nuked itself into oblivion. During the events of World War II, tens of thousands of Japanese Americans were relocated to several internment camps across the country out of fear of domestic attacks. One such camp was the Hart Mountain Camp in Park County, Wyoming, which housed 14,000 Japanese Americans during its 3 years of operation between 1942 and 1945. The camp boasted many activities, a poorly supplied school for children, a hospital, and many sports and social clubs, but, they were still forced to be there and heavily monitored. Way back before the US was even established, the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia was formed in 1607. Just a few years later, settlers experienced what is known as the starving time. The combined effects of the brutal winter of 1609, food shortages, devastating disease, and constant Native American attacks really screwed over colonists who resorted to pure desperation for survival. The colonists ate dogs, rats, their own shoes, and each other in order to survive. 300 settlers saw the beginning of winter, but only 60 saw the beginning of spring. The state of Rhode Island saw around 1,000 slaving voyages between the 18th and 19th century, bringing in an estimated 100,000 slaves to the Americas. The year 1919 saw the occurrence of the Elaine Massacre in Hoopsburg, Arkansas. About 100 African American sharecroppers demanded fairer pricing for their cotton crops as they were frequently underpaid for their labors. During a meeting, which was protected by armed guards, 2 white men rolled up to find out what all the hullabaloo was about. After a brief struggle, some shots were fired, though it's unknown who shot first. One of the men died, the other injured. Well, word got out about the event being a supposed uprising being planned by the black community. In response, several locals and hundreds of US troops were deployed to put an end to the so-called rebellion, resulting in the cold-blooded murder of over 200 African Americans in the area. In 1903, residents of Van Meter, Iowa reported sightings of a strange bat-like humanoid figure for several nights. Dubbed the Van Meter Visitor, the bat-human-dinosaur hybrid monster thing possessed big old flappy wings, sharp claws, and an eerily glowing horn on its melon. Many credible witnesses attest to the sightings, and locals, in true American fashion, shot at the creature in an attempt to kill it. It supposedly escaped into a nearby abandoned mine and was never seen again. In the early 1800s, Colonel William H. Jackson once gifted his favorite oak tree its own deed, legally entitling it to its own ownership and all land within an 8-foot radius of itself. The original tree, located in Athens, Georgia, fell in 1942, but not before an acorn sprouted a new sapling, which legally inherited the land. Why is this bad? That's because there's a chance that this tree owns more land than you do. The Bonneville Salt Flats in northwestern Utah look like something out of a dream sequence. Back in the 1920s, with the evolving technology of automobiles, adrenaline junkies would often challenge each other to travel across the flats as fast as possible. Of course, this inevitably led to numerous crashes, breakdowns, and deaths, a tradition that persists to this day. The Silk Strike of 1913 in Paterson, New Jersey was the organized strike of over 25,000 silk workers with the goal of establishing an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. Over the course of the strike's 5-month duration, 300 silk mills had shut down with no workforce, and over 1,800 strikers were arrested for inciting violence. Ultimately, the strike was defeated as influence failed to spread beyond Paterson and no demands were ever met. Speaking of terrible working conditions, the Radium Girls of Ottawa, Illinois were tasked with hand-painting watches with self-luminous paint made from radioactive powdered radium. The women would often point their brushes with their lips to produce finer tips, but their lips inadvertently sipped the radioactive drips, and if one dared to skip the lip tip grip, their managers would flip, so tips remained dipped and their lips remained zipped. Company owners expressed the safety of the material, but actively avoided it themselves. The ingestion of the radium, unsurprisingly, caused multiple women to contract radiation poisoning. Between the years of 1917 and 1927, over 50 women had died from acute radiation syndrome. This sparked public outrage and reforms in labor rights. Radium continued to be used in the production of watch dials up to the 1970s. Multiple residents outside of Exeter, New Hampshire all reported seeing the same strange light pattern in the sky across several evenings in 1965. The large object reportedly moved silently across the night sky, emitting eerie red lights in a specific pattern. The event terrified locals in the area for years, though skeptics have debunked this event as simply a mid-air refueling drill performed by the United States Air Force. Specifically, KC-97 tankers flashed red lights in the same exact pattern that was described by eyewitnesses. The city of Wilmington, Delaware experienced a catastrophic outbreak of cholera and typhoid fever in the late 1800s thanks to rapid industrialization shitifying up the local water sources. With hundreds sick and dozens dying, the city had to drastically overhaul the local sewer system, including installing a water purification plant in the early 1900s. But at least you can breathe a fresh sigh of relief nowadays. This is a devil's hole pupfish, a critically endangered and supremely cute species of fish found only in the Devil's Hole in the Death Valley National Park in Nevada. Or Nevada for the locals. The fish were first discovered back in the 1940s and were almost immediately attempted to be protected. In 1967, they were officially listed as endangered thanks to local drilling by development companies, which reduced water levels within the cave system. Despite aggressive conservation efforts, there were only 38 of the little guys in existence as of spring 2025, making them one of the most critically endangered species on Earth. The Great Jacksonville Fire of 1901 completely reshaped the city of Jacksonville, Florida. After a rogue kitchen fire broke out, the flames quickly spread to a nearby mattress factory. After more than 8 hours, the inferno finally came under control after completely engulfing the majority of the city, destroying almost 2,400 buildings in the process, rendering 10,000 people homeless and 7 people dead. Now that's what I call a fire sale. Farmers in the late 1960s and early 1970s were pretty pissed to find their precious moo cows slaughtered and mutilated beyond natural means. Investigations clocked in over 8,000 separate mutilations over the years. Some of the bulbous bovines were found to have sedatives in their systems, while others were secretly marked with fluorescent paint. Unidentified aircraft in the area were spotted, suggesting government interventions or possible secret weapons testing, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. 19th century Philadelphia, Pennsylvania saw the rise of several teeth thieves who would go around robbing graves of entire bodies. The corpses would be sold to nearby medical schools for anatomical study, while the teeth were extracted and sold to companies who made dentures. Remember to smile. Kentucky is home to the McCoy family, one half of the infamous Hatfield-McCoy family feud. Initial squabbles began in the 1870s over the Civil War, with the Hatfields being Confederate sympathizers and the McCoys being pro-Union. Across 30 years, multiple lawsuits, thefts, and even murders escalated the feud, with over a dozen family members killed. The feud finally came to an end in the late 1890s. Or did it? About 100 years after the start of it all, descendants of the families came together to duke it out on the game show Family Feud in 1979, with the McCoys coming out on top. Nowadays, the family homes are tourist attractions, holding annual festivals with activities like tug-of-war and sight tours to commemorate the decades-long dispute. Just north of South Dakota is North Dakota, and boy did it suffer a harsh winter in 1936. Record low temperatures plummeted all the way down to negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's negative 51°C for you foreigners. The frigid forecast froze farm fauna fleeing for favorable feverishness. Entire towns burned through their coal supplies, leaving families to die in their homes from exposure. In 1847, nearly 200 Dutch immigrants made their way over from the Netherlands to Wisconsin in search of a better life, but a similar cold climate. After months of crossing the Atlantic and scooting in through to the Great Lakes, the freaky-deaky Dutch were just about to set foot in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, when a poorly maintained boiler overheated, causing a fire to erupt on board the very wooden ship. Unfortunately, the ship only had 2 lifeboats, capable of holding about 20 people each. Of the few hundred people aboard, only 45 managed to escape on the lifeboats. The Phoenix, ironically, went down in a blaze, never to rise from the ashes, because they were washed away. Mysterious deaths surrounding the Ray family had caused concern for the townsfolk of Jewett City, Connecticut. The supposedly healthy family members were stricken down left and right from an undetectable killer. The boys of the family became paler by the day and were seen coughing up blood until ultimately passing away within the coming days. The reasonable cause of death, the townsfolk thought, was vampires. In order to stop the undead from rising and killing others, the recently deceased were exhumed from their graves and burned. The real culprit? Tuberculosis. Conveniently enough, though, the burning of the corpses probably did prevent the contagious disease from spreading any further. Go figure. In 1855, the US government approved the import of several camels to serve as pack animals through the arid landscape of the Southwest, formally establishing the United States Camel Corps. But then the Civil War broke out a few years later in 1861, and the camels were either sold off or completely abandoned in the desert, supposedly being spotted over the next several decades. Roam free, fellas. Boston, Massachusetts is home to the deadliest nightclub fire in US history. The Coconut Grove fire burned itself into people's memories in 1942 with a wealth of poor safety choices leading to the brutal blaze. Exit doors were chained up to prevent unauthorized access, air conditioners were filled with flammable refrigerants, and everyone was packed in like sardines. Not to mention the fact that all of the lavish interior decor could catch fire faster than a witch in Salem. In all, 492 people ended up dying in the inferno. The club owner, Barney Wolanski, who was very much aware of his club's safety code violations, was convicted on just 19 counts of manslaughter and was sentenced to just 15 years in prison, though he was pardoned after just 4. He ended up dying a few weeks after release from cancer. Now, when you're chilling in class, the last thing you want to experience is a big old gas explosion. But unfortunately, the students in the New London School in New London, Texas, were about to do just that. Alright class, who could tell me what happens when you hook a big chunk of magnesium into some water? Yep, Ron. That's an easy one. It just, after recently canceling their natural gas supply contract to save a few buckaroos, the school board decided to instead tap into a local gasoline waste line to supplement the demand. The shitty and shoddy plumbing work caused natural gas leaks throughout the school's basement crawl spaces. Now keep in mind that natural gas is colorless and odorless, so no one was really aware of any leaks, except for the students who complained of headaches, though they were ignored by the staff.
You get out of here, go on, get.
The creeping gas cloud was inadvertently ignited on March 18, 1937, causing an instantaneous explosion that killed 295 out of roughly 500 students and staff present in the building. The disaster led to a reform of requiring odorous additives to be added to natural gas supplies for better detection of leaks. If you're looking for a breath of fresh air, New York City is probably not the best place to do so, especially in 1966. The Great New York City smog blanketed the Big Apple in a giant fart cloud of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and smoke. The dense haze persisted for 3 days across the 1966 Thanksgiving weekend. A public health study estimated that about 10% of the city's population suffered some adverse health effects from sucking in the smelly smog. In the end, 168 New Yorkers ended up biting the dust, prompting President Lyndon B. Johnson and several members of Congress to produce the 1967 Air Quality Act and amendments to the 1970 Clean Air Act, which heavily reduced air pollution down to more manageable levels of toxicity. In the wake of the US Civil War, the South was really hurting for some cheap labor as all of their slaves were just freed thanks to the 13th Amendment. The best alternative? Prisoners. Convicts were extremely cheap compared to full-time employees, so in the early 1890s, Coal Creek mine owners decided to lay off their workforce and instead conscripted convicted criminals to work the mines for pennies on the dollar. But instead of milling around, the recently sacked and salty miners decided to pick a fight, sparking the Coal Creek War of 1891. The manic miners attacked a load of state prisons and mining properties, ensuring their efforts would not be in vain. The National Guard was called in, arresting over 500 workers. The scuffle did result in Tennessee ending their convict leasing program in 1896, so that's a win. Sweet Home Alabama is home to Yellow Mama, an electric chair built in 1927 by master carpenter and inmate Ed Mason. 152 criminals have gotten the sweet, stinging embrace of Yellow Mama's arms, with her final zap being performed in 2002. Since then, death row inmates were given the legal right to choose their demise, either lethal injection or the chair, and to no surprise, they opt for the less painful option. As such, Yellow Mama remains locked away in the attic of the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, patiently waiting for her next victim. Imagine your life as a beaver, munching away on a tree or building a dam, when all of a sudden you get yoinked away from your beaver family, put in a tiny box, flown up to the sky, and hucked out of an airplane to be parachuted down miles away from home. That's exactly what the Idaho Department of Fish and Game did in 1948 after locals complained of excessive property damage. 76 beavers were relocated from northwest Idaho to central Idaho via airdrop using leftover World War II parachutes. One beaver died. Very sad. A big-ass swarm of locusts tore across the Midwest in 1874, devastating any and all vegetation, food, clothes, and farming equipment for days on end, with Nebraska taking most of the damage. Water sources were contaminated and livestock were consumed. High estimates place the swarm size at upwards of 12.5 trillion locusts. I mean, there were quite literally a blanket of locusts a foot high off the ground. The swarm, spanning across 2 million square miles, reportedly blocked out the sun for multiple hours during their flight. By the time the locust plague had passed, the Midwest had sustained over $200 million in crop damages. Bennington Triangle, located across southwestern Vermont, saw several people disappear under mysterious circumstances between 1945 and 1950. The most well-known case being the disappearance of 18-year-old student Paula Jean Weldon, who up and vanished in 1946 and was never seen again. The young girl had reportedly left her college campus in the afternoon and proceeded to walk 6 miles to a nearby trail before going missing. Lack of substantial police investigation, evidence, or witnesses left the case cold. The poorly run investigation had prompted the Vermont legislature to create the Vermont State Police just 7 months after Paula Jean's disappearance. Hundreds of Lakota Sioux natives were gunned down during the Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 after natives began expressing frustration and anger over continued forced relocation and broken promises from the US government. You suck! A new religious movement called the Ghost Dance, a literal dance performed in hopes of ridding the land of white settlers, was seen as a potential act of rebellion.
That's scary, I don't like that.
As a precaution, natives were rounded up and disarmed by the US Army. A misunderstanding surrounding an accidental misfire of a rifle started the massacre, which saw the murder of about 300 native men, women, and children.
Continuing that pattern, Montana had itself one of the worst Native American massacres in US history. The Marias Massacre involved the cold-blooded murder of over 200 Piegan Blackfeet Native Americans, all gunned down by the United States Army near the Marias River in Montana. The whole conflict escalated from years of back-and-forth petty skirmishes, white settlers encroaching on native lands, and Blackfeet natives raiding these new settlements. But all came to a climax on the morning of January 23, 1870, where a large force of US cavalrymen gunned down over 200 Blackfoot natives. Since most of the men were out hunting at the time, the majority of the victims were elders, women, and children.
15 minutes of useless history. Wait, what? Poland had a bear soldier that served during World War II. His name was Wojtek, and he was a good boy. In 1386, France executed a pig that killed a child. It was arrested, faced trial, and was hanged. Poor thing. During the Great Depression, people would often resort to using potato sacks as clothes. Ancient Mayans worshipped turkeys, as they were seen as vessels for the gods. The 69th and 420th words of the Declaration of Independence are to and districts. The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 and hasn't produced a good car since. It's said that in Ohio in 1895, only 2 cars existed across the entire cursed state, and they crashed into each other. Famous scientist Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel. He turned it down. The British Empire had around 120 colonies at its height in the 20th century. Robert Lincoln, son of US President Abraham Lincoln, was present or nearby during 3 different presidential assassinations. He was just a few blocks away from the Ford Theater when Papa Abraham caught a bullet in the back of his skull. He was an eyewitness to President Garfield's assassination, and also experienced President McKinley getting absolutely cannoned in the chest. Afterward, little Bobby Lincoln refused any future invites to presidential events. William Higginbotham, a physicist who worked on the atomic bomb, invented the first video game in 1958 using an oscilloscope. He called his creation Tennis for Two. It was a precursor to Pong. About 4% of the Normandy beaches are made up of leftover shrapnel from the D-Day invasions of World War II. The first European settlement in present-day Uruguay was formed in 1527. It was called San Lázaro and was, you guessed it, a Spanish settlement.
Ancient Roman warships were equipped with huge fucking flamethrowers that were used in naval warfare. They called it Greek fire, and boy was it effective. In the year 1204, Valdemar II of Denmark was recognized as king in Norway. Ketchup used to be sold as medicine in the 1830s. George Washington died on December 14, 1799 at the age of 67. His last words were, "'Tis well." In ancient Greece, skirts were considered manly and pants were for women. Nothing like letting the boys breathe, you know?
The record for the world's longest stare was set in 2011 in Australia. The loving glare lasted 41 minutes straight and 0 minutes gay.
French monarch King Charles VI suffered from a psychological disorder called the glass delusion, where he was thoroughly convinced that his entire being was made out of glass, and thus likely to shatter into pieces at the slightest poke. He wore clothes enforced with iron rods and prevented anyone from touching him. In 1633, the Shanxi province in Imperial China was ground zero to the Great Plague in the late Ming Dynasty. More than half of the population got sick that year, and over 90% of the province's population was dead 9 years later. The Roman Colosseum used to be covered in marble, but after Rome fell, the marble was looted by big titty goth pillagers. The Mariana Trench was first discovered in 1875. It is measured at about 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters deep at its lowest point. Dr. John Kellogg, creator of the famous cereal brand, invented cornflakes and graham crackers to prevent his patients from gooning. The ancient African city of Timbuktu was founded in the 5th century. It served as a popular trade route for salt, gold, and people begrudgingly forced to work for free. During the 18th century in England, carrying around a pineapple was a telltale sign that you were rich as hell. Haters gonna hate, bruh. The chainsaw was invented by medical doctors as a tool for symphysiotomy, a procedure for aiding in childbirth. There's an ancient text called the Voynich manuscript, handwritten in an unknown language that has never been deciphered. Wait, what's that say? Oh, would you look at that? Famous silly named astronomer Galileo Galilei discovered the planet of Jupiter using a handheld telescope in 1610. So you know how the US government banned alcohol during the Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s? Well, people still wanted to get absolutely slizzard, so they resorted to stealing and drinking industrial alcohol. You know, like rubbing alcohol used to treat wounds? Yeah, you're not supposed to drink that stuff because industrial alcohol is commonly denatured, meaning that toxic additives like kerosene or acetone are mixed in to prevent people from drinking it. What's fun is that this didn't really stop anyone from power chugging the stuff, so they could feel all wavy and wiggly. The mass consumption resulted in the deaths of around 10,000 Americans. Cheers. The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Qing Shi was the commander of the Chinese Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of over 300 warships and about 80,000 crew. Move over, Blackbeard. About 90% of the world's freshwater is frozen in Antarctica's ice shelves. Humanity's been trying to melt it out of there for ages. In 1998, over 1,200 human bones were found in Benjamin Franklin's house. They were used to study human anatomy, or so they say. Pablo Picasso's first painting was called El Picador, which he created at just 8 years old. It sucked. I wrote most of this script on February 29th, 2024. Happy leap year. Pope Gregory IX declared war on cats. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea. Athletes in the ancient Olympics competed completely naked to show off the guns and show off the buns. The word robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor. The year 536 is commonly referred to as the worst year in history to be alive. A volcanic eruption in Europe farted out enough dust and debris to cause a multi-year winter. The lack of sunlight dropped average global temperatures by several degrees, causing crop failure and famine in Europe and Asia. Oh yeah, and then the plague showed up. Napoleon's horse was named Marengo. Established in the year 930, Iceland has the oldest parliament in the world. The 13th Grand Duke of Lithuania was Jogaila Algirdaitis. He was also King of Poland. According to a 2021 census, 55% of Isle of Man residents identify as Christian. 44% aren't religious at all. Abraham Lincoln was a licensed bartender. The first capital of the ancient city of Assyria was Ashur. Now you can get across the Bridge of Death.
What is the capital of Assyria?
Ashur.
Right, off you go.
The very first known written language is Sumerian, with the earliest known usage dating back to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. The German MG-42 machine gun used in World War II has a firing rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute with an effective range of up to 2,000 meters. In the Roman Empire, a triumvir monetalis was someone who minted coins. The Great Fire of London in 1666 started in a small bakery and quickly engulfed the majority of the city for 4 days. Firefighting methods at the time were no more than buckets of water or destroying other buildings to stop the spread. In the end, 85% of the city's residents were now homeless. On the bright side, only 6 people reportedly died, so there's a spark of positivity. The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 and fell in 1922. At the end of World War II, Russian citizens decided to party hard. So hard, in fact, that the entire country's vodka reserves were tapped out in just 22 hours. Nastrovia! In 1973, Chinese Supreme Communist overlord Mao Zedong offered the United States 10 million Chinese women. As a joke. Instead, he ended up killing 40 to 80 million people during his totalitarian dictatorship. It was supposed to be a great leap forward, Mao. A popular fad in the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, and just like my romantic endeavors, it didn't last long. Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Rich people in 19th century Europe were in harsh competition for who could collect the most unique and rare orchids. Too bad none of them pulled a Black Lotus. Alexander the Great named over 20 cities after himself during his conquering of over 2 million square miles of land by age 30. What have you done with your life? In 1953, US President Dwight Dimmadome Eisenhower was lassoed by cowboy Marty Montana on horseback during his inauguration speech. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi to produce Hanafuda playing cards. Famed philosopher Socrates didn't really like written words. He believed it was an inefficient way to communicate knowledge and that it would make people lazy and ruin their ability to use the power of memory to recall information. Thus, people would rely on text to retrieve information instead of fully understanding concepts. As a result, the stubborn asshole never wrote anything down. J.R.R. Tolkien's full name was John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. You read the Harry Potter books, right? The Laotian Civil War lasted 16 years, 6 months, 1 week, and 2 days. Despite how old you think it was, the Aztec Empire was actually founded in 1428. King Henry VIII had 4 butt-wiping servants called Grooms of the Stool. For their services, all 4 were formally knighted. At the start of World War I, the US Air Force had only 18 pilots and 12 airplanes. In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular execution method. Germany fully controlled 4 colonies during the scramble for Africa in the 1800s and 1900s. They included territories in modern-day Burundi, Cameroon, Namibia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Togo. On average, Germany uncovers about 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year. The wealthy class in Victorian England loved making themselves as white as possible, so they would eat and bathe in arsenic to lighten their complexion. The first version of the internet, called ARPANET, began as a connection between 2 computers in California in 1969. It eventually branched out to multiple computers for research purposes and information sharing, forming an intercommunication network, shortened to Internetwork, and shortened more to the internet. Nowadays, you can watch someone press their feet into a webcam halfway across the world for $3.99 an hour. Or so I've heard. China was actually the first country to use paper money all the way back in the 7th century because coins were just too dang heavy for merchants to lug around all the time. Roman gladiator blood was once used as a cure for epilepsy. It didn't work. Using forks to eat food used to be considered offensive to God since he gave you hands to eat with. In the 1856 Belgian general election, Catholics won the Chamber of Representatives 63-45 against the Liberal Party. The Secretary of the Navy during the United States Civil War was Gideon Welles. He had 8 children. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896. The first silver medalist, gold medals didn't exist yet, was American James B. Connolly in the triple jump. Winston Churchill reportedly smoked up to 15 cigars a day. Private George Price of the Canadian Army was the last casualty of World War I. On November 11, 1918, he was hit in the chest by a sniper at 10:58 a.m. in Mons, Belgium, 2 minutes before the war officially ended. Sorry about that.
The first emperor of Japan was legendary Emperor Jimmu, a claimed descendant of the sun god Amaterasu, though there is no evidence that he actually existed. Robert Liston was a British surgeon in the 1800s famous for his swift surgeries. In a time where the best anesthetics were a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, speed was critical to minimize pain. During his most famous surgery, Liston set a leg amputation 80% record in just 2.5 minutes flat, severing the fingers of his assistant and accidentally stabbing a nearby spectator. All 3 men died. Basketball was invented in 1891 by Canadian-American physician James Naismith. You put ball in basket. Fun. During World War II, Americans called hamburgers Liberty steaks and sauerkraut Liberty cabbage. The weather in Phoenix, Arizona in the US on April 20th, 1969 at around 5 p.m. was 90 degrees Fahrenheit with winds east-southeast at 8 miles per hour. The Lebanese city of Tyre was founded in 2750 BC. The first instance of income tax in the US started in 1861 to raise funds for the Civil War. Anyone making over $800, or the equivalent of $28,000 today, was taxed a flat rate of 3%. Marie Antoinette's music teacher was a German opera composer by the name of Christoph Willibald Gluck.
The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time came out in November of 1998, and I'm still playing it.
No witches were actually burned alive during the Salem witch trials. Instead, they were just hanged, which is quicker and doesn't smell as bad. In 1644, eating pie was banned in England. Meat pies, fruit pies, your wife's pie, all of them. Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi is regarded as a national hero. He led a political resistance against Belgium and demanded independence from the colonizers. He was elected second prime minister of Burundi in 1961 and served his country for 2 weeks before he was assassinated by political opponents. Burundi was granted independence from Belgium a year later. The Kingdom of Karagwe in modern-day Tanzania was disestablished in 1963. Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle. A carrier pigeon named Commando successfully carried out over 90 missions during World War II. He even got a medal. The 5th leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and the guy had eyebrows for days. The 27th state added to the US was Florida. Despite humans being around for over 200,000 years, written history is only 6,000 years old, so who knows what they did? Probably hucked rocks at each other. The Industrial Revolution in the US began in 1760
It lasted all the way until 1840.
The popular game Jenga experienced a lull of sales in 2001 because Jenga towers weren't the only ones to fall that year. Silk was first used in clothing back in China in 3630 BC. Silky smooth. During the stock market crash of 1929, the Dow Jones Index, which tracks 30 of the biggest US companies, fell 89% when it bottomed out in the summer of 1932. It took 22 years to get back to pre-crash heights. That's why I invest responsibly. All on red.